Hello and welcome to the Bond Revisited podcast with me, Tom.
And me, Joe.
The podcast where we rewatch the Bond films one by one, discuss them, and then rank them alongside the other Bond films to build our own definitive list for the Bond franchise. You are listening to episode 2, where we'll be revisiting the film From Russia with Love. The thing that's really nice about this podcast and doing this rewatch is that the Bond franchise starts so strong. Like, we get to watch some pretty good films right off the bat. It doesn't start that naff, as we found out last week. And I think I can say going into this one, we were probably both excited to check this one out again.
Oh, yes. Well, it was number 4 on my list of top 5 Bond films. I think it was 4.
I want to say 5, because I think you said you weren't a big Sean Connery fan. I think you said you hated Sean Connery, something like that. I can't remember.
Well, he said something to me that was very mean one time, and I hold grudges. No, I think you're right, actually. I think it was 5.
Yeah.
So I knew it was going to be good. I think we both probably knew it was going to be good. It's up there. But I will say, having watched it now for the first time in probably about 5 years, there are some things I did have issues with. It wasn't quite as amazing as I thought it was going to be.
Okay, well, we'll get into that. But yeah, like you say, I think I had good memories of Dr. No, and it was nice that living up to that. And I knew in my head that I liked From Russia with Love more than Dr. No. So after coming away from that and being like, yeah, Dr. No was a good time, I was like, this is definitely be a good time. I'm actually really looking forward to this. Got to sit down, put the disc in again. I was like, yes, I am so ready for more James Bond.
Did you have a good time?
I did have a good time.
Good.
I think it was quite surprising how watching Dr. No From Russia with Love quite close, it was actually quite surprising how linked those films are and how similar they are, because we talked about the technical problems last time at Dr. No, so we'll get into it this time, but it's very interesting to see them being that sequel, which makes sense because they only came out a year apart, so obviously it wasn't going to completely flip everything on its head. But I was quite surprised about the strong connections between the two, both in terms of how it was made and the content itself.
You know, I was going to bring that point up later on because I totally agree. There was things in this film that if I had not seen Dr. No only a few days beforehand, I probably wouldn't have made the connections. And that's kind of the beauty of doing this podcast where we are seeing them one after one and being able to make these connections between the film because... yeah, some very, very cool little... I don't know if they were sort of... I don't know how kind of specific they were with trying to make little callbacks to the first film. Maybe it was just because, as you say, like they're just sort of so close together. It just happened naturally. But yeah, I guess... well, I'll get onto them at some point. But kind of cool little symmetries, I suppose. What was that thing that George Lucas said? It's like poetry. It rhymes. There you go. These are basically the prequel films.
Okay, shall we get into it then?
Let's get into it.
So the first impression for me, we talked about it last time about the opening, how the James Bond theme wasn't playing at the very start when Bond starts walking across the screen with the circles. So even seeing that get synced up properly made me excited.
It was just like straight off the bat. Oh, okay. They didn't take them long to sort that out because you're right. It's just like, oh, there it is. There it is. That's what I like to see.
Yeah, and seeing Sean Connery in the hat again, very nice. I appreciate that. I don't know at what point we lose the hat. I don't know if we're going to see the hat for the whole Sean Connery saga, but this is what I'm most vested in to see. And I think points may have to be deducted based on if the hat is there or not.
Would points be deducted based on it not even being Sean Connery?
I guess we'll let that off. I'll let that slide. But definitely on the Sean Connery meter, it's going to have to be considered because he just looks great in the hat.
Because I think the first two are, I forget, I think he's the stunt guy, Bob Simmons, I want to say his name is.
Oh.
And then as soon as we get to hatless Bond, I think that is actually Sean Connery.
Well, I guess they couldn't get away with it, could they, if they took the hat off?
No, absolutely not.
For such a dangerous stunt as walking across the screen and turning slightly.
Hey, Tom, slips, trips and falls are the number one cause of accidents in the workplace.
Yeah?
He could have slipped, tripped or fell doing that walk.
Yeah, I mean, I do know film scenes are quite dangerous, but I think that's more from helicopter crashes and fatal shootings. But anyway. Okay, so straight away we get the first opening sequence. And again, we talked about so much in the last episode about all the things that are kind of missing and not quite right. But just like how the opening of the film, the Bond theme plays straight away. You get Sean Connery walking across, he shoots the screen just as it is in all the other films. And then it goes into this opening sequence straight away that has this really cool vibe to it. It was something that this whole setup leading all the way up until we get into the film proper, it's just all here to build excitement. And I have to say, it fully sucked me in. And I was so ready to go for this film.
Well, yeah, I suppose it is the first. It's the pre-title sequence. It's the birth of this as the Bond staple, which became, something you saw in every single film. Even though I don't actually think it was filmed as that. I think they, in editing, they moved it to before the credits.
Yeah, I read that as well. It kind of explains because this opening sequence is quite short as well, and it makes sense because. Yeah, I read the same thing. Terrence Young said, let's move that to the front to get a shocking moment right away.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think anyone in the cinema would have been fooled that Bond is dying in the first 5 minutes of the film. But nonetheless, it still has this great vibe to it. Kind of leaves you with questions about who this guy is. What is this big shady team doing? And I don't know about you, but I got a lot of nostalgia just because of, I know we were talking about Bond games in episode 0 of this podcast, but I remember playing the hedge maze level of the From Russia with Love game a lot. So I was just like, oh yeah, I remember walking around this hedge maze.
Nostalgia is not the word I would use.
Oh,
but I think you're right. As in terms of that game, this is probably the most iconic, or that was probably the most iconic part of that game. So if you're going to connect it to anything, it probably would be that.
Yeah. I just like, seeing Grant around the corner here and there. Very good. And actually, going back to the film, I got to say, obviously, spoilers, it's not actually Bond. Shock horror. But when they do the whole mask revealing scene, I was fully prepared for it to look terrible. It's just because I just assumed that it would actually look quite good.
Yeah, I thought so. They clearly put in the time to make a proper Sean Connery face mask. I was going to say plastic, but I guess it's rubber, maybe?
Yeah, and it had such a great sound effect when it's pulled off. I actually went back and replayed it. It was just like ASMR in a weird way.
Oh god.
That's my ASMR is Sean Connery plastic masks being pulled off.
So many truths are coming out about you, Joe. I think there's going to be a profile of you once this podcast is done.
I think there might already be.
Yeah, from the Roger Moore body pillow
to the mopping.
You want to be sprayed down and mopped. Now ASMR Sean Connery rubber mask.
Do you not think it was a really good sound effect?
Okay, I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
So roughly what this scene is that it cuts to a place at night where we have Sean Connery as Bond creeping around in the classic tux, which is, again, really nice to see that classic Bond look straight away. It really does evoke of like, yes, Bond, we're seeing Bond here. And then Agent Grant, or this blonde man, hunting him. And eventually what happens is that Grant gets the wire out, strangles the James Bond, he dies, but then we get all the lights come on and we're revealed, no, it was just a training exercise. And that James Bond was actually not James Bond. It was just someone posing as him so Grant can train against him.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that I really like about this, in hindsight, if you compare it to all the other Bond films, which eventually did have the pre-title sequence being a staple, being this big bombastic, it's usually got a really big stunt involved for the first bit of the film. And that's great, don't get me wrong, I love a good stunt, and we'll get onto many in the future Bond films, but I kind of liked this being quite low-key, and actually just a bit more mysterious, kind of raising a few questions, and not being a great big fireball or a big car chase or something. It was quite refreshing in a way, actually.
I 100% agree. I think it works very well because this is a very quiet scene. It's at night. It's just two people trying to take each other out. And yes, there's that payoff at the end, but even then it doesn't get loud. But as a contrast of the Bond theme at the beginning and then having it go into the From Russia with Love musical piece as well, it works really well. And especially because this is a sequel to a film that did very well, having this quieter moment where you are thinking, as you say, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening. And you still get that payoff of, oh, this is Spectre's training area. And that in itself is very cool because Dr. No talks about Spectre in the last film. So for this film to start off as an extra look into Spectre and what's going on there is actually really neat. And I think it just sets everything up very well, even though it is a very quiet and, to be honest, quite short scene.
Yeah, there's not really much to it. There's just a few peeking around edges, and then out comes the what is the wire called? I want to say it's like a garrote or something.
Is it?
Garrote, yeah, something like that. But I think it did a very good job at the start, and like you say, following on with the Spectre thing. Kind of just that nice connection to the first film, and bearing in mind it was only a year after it came out, then it's going to be in people's minds, oh yeah, Dr. No, oh right, yeah, Bond killed him, so they're going to want revenge on specifically this one man. So it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and it sets up some nice foreshadowing later for when Grant obviously attacks Bond for real, which is very nice because, again, you connect it straight away to this scene, and it just makes it a little bit more satisfying when that fight does eventually go down.
It's like poetry, Tom. It rhymes.
Damn you, Lucas. So after that, we do go into the opening credit sequence, which, to be fair, we did have a credit sequence in the last film, but this one feels a little bit more cohesive and put together. There's no three blind mice cutting into this one, which is very nice.
Yeah, I actually put down about just how impressive I thought this pre-title sequence was, because it's so simple. It literally is just a belly dancer and a projector. But it kind of like does so much of so little, like the whole waving text and obviously the music, which isn't the big Matt Monroe song. It's a sort of instrumental version instead, which is a bit strange. I kind of forgot it wasn't in the the title sequence. It's on the radio a little bit later on, and then it's obviously at the end credits, but that caught me off guard. But yeah, I just thought it was like such a nice intro. And it didn't, I think because it was based on just, a lady dancing in front of the camera with a projector, it didn't have a lot of what I would say ages, a lot of the other title sequences where it's got a bit more kind of editing to it and a lot more like the silhouettes and stuff. And as you get further on into the Bond films when they try and do more, this is just very pure and it really works and it just looks great.
Yeah, the setup that these short scenes do, I think, is fantastic. As I already said, these scenes to me got me very excited for the rest of the film, which is exactly what they're trying to do. But I completely agree that the simplicity of that works really well. But I do remember the fact that it is a musical-only theme, because to me, when you say From Russia With Love theme, I think of this song. I do not think of the vocal version, because I love this theme so much. And the fact that it's that is like my favorite bit of any Bond music out there. And I always find it weird when people think of the vocal one, not because I think that's a bad song. I just think this is one of the strongest and greatest Bond musical pieces out there. And the fact that it goes into the Bond theme for a little bit, but it doesn't go all in with that. You get this really nice mix. So you get this very strong Bond feeling, but you still get this like original music that also feels like Bond. I think it's just such an amazing mix. And I don't know exactly the situation with John Barry at this point, because I want to say John Barry didn't compose the score for the last film, Dr. No, but he did for this one.
I think you're right. I think it was Monty Norman in Dr. No, but yeah, for this one it was John Barry.
Yeah, so we are now fully in the John Barry era, which lasts quite a long time, and he just does such an incredible job. There's other music across this film that is really good, but this theme in particular is very in your face, but also it ties quite well in with the visuals, with the belly dancer and things like that. It slows down a little bit, then speeds up. It's so good. I just love this song. Just love it.
It was a smart choice to have this and not the actual vocal version, because as good as the vocal version is, it is a bit of a crooner song. It's a bit slower. It's a bit more subdued, and it wouldn't. I think you need a bit of a bombastic start, especially after the pre-title sequence, which is quiet in itself. Then you need to get the film going, and this is like a way better start, in my opinion.
Yeah, you get the reveal. It wasn't really Bond. He's not really dead. And then you're like, yes.
Yeah, it just works. What I did think was quite funny, though, this is just a minor nitpick. It's not even a nitpick. It was just, like I'm saying how they had all the cool camera angles and making the credits wave in weird, cool, like funny ways. But then you could definitely tell at one point, there's like, right, well, now we've got like 10 names to list. We can't do that. Let's just put it on a projector and then we'll wave some hands in front of it. It's just like, oh, that would do. That's exotic enough.
Yeah, they won't see it on the big screen, will they?
It's the run out of ideas.
We only have double the budget. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, and it definitely shows, I think. So then after that, we move on to a very exciting intro of a chess game, which I know we all love to see.
That's what we're here for, right? James Bond, chess?
Giant, and a giant chess board as well, so you can see exactly what's happening. Because I know chess. I'm great at chess. So yeah, there's two people. Don't laugh at that.
I didn't know. I wasn't.
I could be. There's two people playing chess, and it's all, again, it's gone back to being quite quiet. It's very, very, you could hear a pin drop, and one of the, I don't want to say dodgy looking, but he definitely looks evil, right? The evil looking guy gets a note on his little glass coaster thing saying that you need, you're summoned, basically.
You are required at once.
Ah, yes, at once. And who is it? Of course, it is Blofeld. And then we get, this is the first sight of Blofeld, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So he gets summoned to Blofeld along with, I think he's number 5 and Kleb is number 3, I think, in terms of numbers. Is that right?
I think so. I'm checking my notes. I only wrote her name down. I just called her Russian woman for all my notes.
That's longer than Kleb.
Yes, it's number 3, and then the other guy's number
3. Yeah, so they get summoned to Blofeld, and then we sort of go over a bit of the plan, what eventually ends up as the plot of the film. I got to say, straight off the bat, I don't really like this Blofeld introduction.
Okay.
I think I get the whole not showing him. That's fine. They want to keep it secret. I really don't like the voice. I do not like the voice actor they chose for Blofeld. I put down here that it sounds like Santa Claus a little bit. So,
that's awesome.
What's
not to love?
It's just your friendly, maniacal, guy that wants to take over the world. He just sounds like Kris Kringle.
I get what you're saying. It didn't bother me too much, but when we just had Dr. No, that did a very effective kind of soft-spoken but intelligent kind of voice, and then we get something that's a little bit more, I guess, cartoony and out there, it is a little bit of a mismatch that the idea of this guy with this voice actually is in charge of Dr. No, when Dr. No had a little bit better presence and voice.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think coming from Dr. No, where it and I think in my head, where I've read some of the books with Blofeld, and it's sort of written, he's written as a very sort of slimy, thin, cold character. That sort of warm, boomy voice didn't quite match with me, but that's me comparing to the books. I still think in of itself, I didn't really love the voice, but I think the scene overall was quite good. You had the fighting fish, kind of as a bit of a metaphor. That's the word I was trying to think of for Spectre, kind of biding their time, pitting others against each other, which is obviously going to be Britain and Russia in the film. And I hope, although I'm pretty sure this is not the case, do you think any fish were harmed during the making of this film?
I think they were definitely harmed. I think that's all real.
I think so too.
They wouldn't kill a tarantula, absolutely not, but Japanese fighting fish, screw them. Feed it to that cat.
Everyone loves cats.
Yeah, so the thing I really liked about this is again, I like the intro because it's straight into, Spectre, this is who Spectre are. And then even following the opening sequence, we don't say, and here's James Bond for real doing James Bond films. No, we actually get more setup for Spectre as an organization. And seeing how it was just almost a passing comment in Dr. No, I think that was very smart. And it's really nice to kind of see this, especially with some quite quiet scenes. The chess match is obviously very quiet because it's a chess match. And this guy, one little detail I quite liked is that as soon as he sees the whole "you are required at once," he does one move and wins the game and then just leaves. I believe the implication being that he's so incredibly smart that he's basically just like toying with the guy, which is a nice subtle kind of setup of this guy knows what he's talking about. It doesn't pay off at all. The guy turns out to be pretty dumb as far as things go, and it doesn't work out for him, but it's nice setup. And then getting the whole, it's a little bit cartoony now, Blofeld stroking a cat, telling number 3 and number 5, oh, we all get that, James Bond, let me tell you that. But it was still enjoyable. It's that line that James Bond always crosses between actually feeling quite evil and tense and being a little bit silly. And I think this one actually finds a good balance where you're learning more about Spectre. There's a little bit of intimidation there, but it's also a bit silly. And like you say, that imagery of the Japanese fighting fish is, I think, surprisingly effective, especially considering the scene ends with one of them being fed to the cats. Like, that's just not a very nice image to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we touched on this before in Dr. No about how with films like Austin Powers now, it's kind of difficult sometimes to see things before they became a cliche and a bit of a spoof. But I suppose this is one of those scenarios where it's just a guy stroking a cat. Like, back then, I'm sure it was normal, not normal, but like, it wouldn't be funny. It's just this mysterious character. But now it's kind of like, it's difficult to get the image of Dr. Evil out of your head necessarily. But I think even with that, like, keeping the character hidden and especially committing to it as well for quite a while in the film series, as we'll see, was quite a bold move, and I like it.
Yeah, I like seeing the cat and not seeing Blofeld's face. I think where it gets a bit dumb for me, and we'll have to get there when we get to the later films, is when you see Blofeld with the full get-up still stroking the cat. That's when it kind of loses me a bit. But when it's just the cat being stroked a little bit, for me that still works well enough within the context of the film.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that.
And also worth noting is that they don't even call him Blofeld at all. Throughout this whole film, they just call him number 1, I believe, which again gives him a little bit more mystery.
Yeah, that's true. Although weirdly, it does say his name in the credits.
Yes, like in full as well, like Ernest Blofeld. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't quite understand why they would do that, but hey, maybe it was just a different team and they didn't get the memo. It's like, oh wait, we were supposed to keep that secret.
You put the question mark in the wrong place. So after that scene, we don't even get to Bond after this. We actually go back to the large estate where that guy was training and killed the fake James Bond earlier, but this time it's during the day, and the Russian woman, or number 3, gets a tour of the place, which they call Spectre Island, which did make me laugh a little bit. They got an island and named it after themselves. It's a little bit childish, but sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Monster Island.
Yeah, there's monsters there.
And there's Spectre here, so it's Spectre Island.
Yeah. And this whole scene is also a little bit silly. This is where you can start, the budget starts coming through a little bit, I feel, because as she's taking a tour of this facility, they're showing training all the different troops and things like that. But there's such an insane variety of these exercises going on in such a small area. Like, you got people shooting at targets, that's fair enough. But then you got someone with a flamethrower just burning down a target. Like, I guess you need target practice for a flamethrower, I guess?
Hey, I guess so. Maybe this is his first day. It's my first day. I did think it was a little bit silly. I did think that whole... yeah, you're right. You could definitely tell, like, they had this a lot more money, and they thought, right, let's just put all this stuff going on screen. It's just to show what we can do. But actually, when you have this, the scene preceding it, where it's this really super serious, the number 3 and number 5 meeting number 1, and this is their plot and the fighting fish, and then you go from that to people like somersaulting over flames, and it's a little bit like whiplash from that. Yeah. But I've got to stand by what I said at the beginning. I have to embrace the cheesiness, and so I'm going to let it slide.
Yeah, I would agree. I let it slide. But you got things like karate going on as well. So that's the thing. It's quite interesting because if you had to do this scene and take it 100% seriously, how would you do it? I feel like it would be very militant. Like, it's all about efficiency and everyone beating to the same drum and being very precise and to the point. But this one actually goes the other way, where they all just seem kind of insane, and we've just got all these people just with all these weapons just going like ha 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 ha, ha bang, 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 and stuff like that, which is kind of the opposite of what you would kind of expect, which does make it quite easy to parody. But, like you say, it's James Bond, so they're not supposed to be super, super scary. Just kind of like, look at all these guys with all this equipment that James Bond might have to fight. Although I don't think he fights any of them ever in this film. So there's that.
No, that poor guy never got to use his flamethrower.
No, he trained so hard as well. All that training for
he
nothing.
passed with flying colours.
And then eventually number 3 gets to Grant. My notes say blonde man the entire time. I didn't pick up on his name at all.
Okay, so we have Russian lady, blonde man. Is Bond dark-haired man?
Scottish hairy man.
I did put actually that he has his eyebrows are humongous. I couldn't stop looking at them on screen.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, that was besides the point. Do go on.
Yeah, so then we get to him who, like, a woman gets undressed for no reason, I don't think. I think that it was very clear, like, let's get some sex appeal in here. I don't know why it's there.
Not when you have Kleb on screen. Oh.
I know, that's where everyone should be looking. Did you see Grant's very short towel?
It was ludicrously short.
I don't know. Where do you get a towel like that?
I don't know. Did he must have picked up the wrong towel. He must have picked up a face towel or a hand towel.
He went to the flannel section rather than the towel section. It was like, oh, you know what? I'm a pretty tough guy. Let's see if anyone laughs at me.
Spectre Island needs some clearer signage for their towels.
They've got their training down in flamethrowers, but they need towel training. That's where we're going to win this war.
now I just like vision all these people flying around, towels going everywhere.
But I guess with the whole woman massager thing, I think it comes down to what they do quite a lot in this film. And that's making this guy a parallel to James Bond. There are so many things where they're trying to set him as just a Spectre version of Bond. And I would guess that scene and a woman kind of massaging him out in the sun, which is actually the next scene is the exact same thing. We just see James Bond being massaged by a woman in a very sunny place. So I do believe there's this straight off the bat, they're trying to make these parallels.
That is actually a really good point. I'd not even really thought about that, because you're right. As we'll see, there is a very strong effort to almost make it like for like, even down to the camera shots that we'll see. So I didn't even put the 2 and 2 together about how it's going to be, like Bond's a ladies' man, so this guy's got to have a woman as well. Yeah,
they don't go deep into it, but all those little things that you associate with Bond, they do make an effort to make this guy, the blonde man, I need to get out of that habit, Agent Grant, have all those same things, and it's really effective. So this is just the first one of all these little things they add in throughout the film. What
I thought wasn't very effective was Kleb's method of approval. One punch to the stomach. It's good enough. Doesn't seem very thorough, if you ask me.
No, she's quite a small, fragile woman.
Don't tell her that.
No, I wouldn't dare. She might give me the old knife shoot if I did that.
Oh, yeah.
But, it's very odd. I think she just wanted to get a hit in for a laugh, almost. Like, she puts on a knuckle duster and then punches him in the stomach and is like, yep, you're all good. But it's like, it would be quite funny if he just went down.
Oh, he just punched her back.
Yeah. There's so many opportunities to parody this. Like, we talked about Austin Powers, but it does kind of write itself if somebody was to do a Bond parody. You can see why there were so many of them.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So the next scene is not even us getting to Bond. We have not even officially got to James Bond yet. Instead, we get to the next part of their plan. So I don't know if I want to try and attempt to explain Spectre's plan in this in one go, because it is a little bit complicated.
It's definitely a step up from Dr. No.
Yes, so I think roughly, because number 3, number 5, and Blofeld discussed it, they are going to trick a Russian woman who's dedicated to Russia to pretend that she's into James Bond and is going to give James Bond a machine that I don't quite remember what it does.
The Lector, as far as I understood, it was basically like the machines from World War II that they cracked. I think it was one of those, like a ciphering machine.
Yeah. So they're going to get her to give it to James Bond, but I'm pretty sure the whole time they were planning on stealing it back by using this Agent Grant.
Yes. So yeah, Spectre, who Kleb went over to, defected to. That's the word I was trying to think of. Still acting as if she's head of operations in Russia. Kind of sets an assignment for. I forgot everyone's names. What's the not Natalia? That's not her name. Tanya. Yes, that's right. Sets her up to basically pretend to defect to Bond, fall in love with him, give him the Lecter. And you're right. Then Spectre steps in, steals the Lecter back, sells it back to the Russians, makes loads of money, maybe improves Spectre Island's TOW capabilities.
Yeah, and I think it's also tied to the Cold War, where they want to create more friction between the East and the West. So they're going to do that while also making money off this whole transaction.
Yeah, just be thankful. This is by far not the most complex Bond plot. Wait till we get to Octopussy. We're going to be screwed.
Yeah, probably. Like, it's quite interesting though, because I've always somewhat had a little bit of a hard time following Bond films. I don't want to make myself feel stupid, but even in the Daniel Craig era, the first time I watched some of these films, it is actually quite easy to miss some of these details. And interestingly enough, From Russia with Love, similar to Dr. No, we talked about it in the last podcast, moves at a very fast pace. And especially everything up to the train. Because in my head, I split this film in two. Everything before the train and everything on the train and after the train. And everything before the train actually moves very quick. And it is actually very easy to miss some of these kind of plot details. Not enough where you don't know what's going on and you get lost, but enough so some of the kind of smaller things that happen in the plot can completely go, you can completely miss them and then just move on to the next thing, which is Bond fighting the bad guys.
Don't worry, Tom. You don't feel stupid because I'm exactly the same. I'm exactly the same. And I think you're right. I think it's where it's like such a mixture of action. You got to have the action, you got to have this, you got to have that. But we also need to have the plot in there as well. It is very easy to miss, as you say, little details. They don't ruin the whole film because it's not crucial points. And at the end of the day, especially with these early Bond films, a lot of them can just be Bond versus Blofeld or Bond versus the Russians, and that's all you really need to know. Like, oh, they're the bad guys, these are the good guys. But I think with this one, yeah, it just about toes the line, I'd say, of moving quickly but keeping the plot relatively well known.
Yeah, you can certainly follow it, but I feel like Dr. No had a lot more aggressive streamlining in terms of the plot to make it quite easy to follow, which led to a more simplified plot. Where this one, I believe, follows the book a lot more, and it means that you get some of these kind of storylines that are just kind of, they're not streamlined in the same way. They just happen quite fast. And it's not really a negative against the film, because similar to Dr. No, I appreciate the fast pace. This is not a film that kind of sits on one thing for too long. If there's a quiet scene and a slower scene, it's very deliberate. It's very much going after something, and then the next scene will be very quick and it can get very chaotic, and you get this nice mix. So I think it works in the film's favor, but it does feel like it's one of those adaptations where it wants to put everything in from the book, which means certain things do get a little bit rushed, but because it's James Bond, it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, you just sort of move with it, don't you? And I suppose, speaking of that, we finally do see James Bond eventually. I didn't actually look at how many minutes in, but it's got to be at least 15 minutes, I'd say?
I think at least that, yeah. We've had like 5-6 scenes already.
Yeah. So after Spectre Island and Grant, we do see his alter ego, to an extent, Bond there with Sylvia Trench returns from the first film.
That was really nice. That was a really nice bit of continuity. I had no memory of that happening. But yeah, the woman who was at the table playing poker, well, not poker, whatever, Snap, when they were playing Snap and James Bond does his intro, she comes back and is who Bond is hanging out with in this scene. Yeah.
So, Bond does have girlfriends, it looks like. At least they hang around for a little bit longer than some others do. And they're just sort of canoodling in a are they in the boat?
I think they're by the side of the river.
Yeah. And just sort of, I think there's a bit of a bit of the old back and forth flirtiness, and then Bond gets the call that he is being just like the Spectre agent. Bond is being summoned by M with a very what I would imagine quite a high tech phone in his car.
Yeah, it would
At the
have to be,
time.
right, for the 60s.
Yeah.
So there was a couple of things that stood out about this scene, because it's a very simple scene. It's just Bond hanging out with a girl and then they called up. But the first one is that this is when the From Russia with Love vocal theme plays over the radio. And I think it's got to be the only time in the whole franchise that they play the theme during, like, actually playing in world and not be part of the score. And it's a little bit surreal to think about James Bond just like listening to his own themes while hanging out.
That's a good point. Yeah, there is a term for that. I can't remember what it was now. Diegetic, non-diegetic. It's one of them. But yeah, where it's like part of the actual world. I wonder why they did that as well. Why even just have that little taste of it?
Yeah, I guess they just wanted to get it in, I would assume. Like, I don't know if they were that worried about the charts at this point, because as we know on later films when they were doing the themes, I think there was a very conscious effort to say, yes, we want this to be a successful song in its own right, so we need to kind of get it in there. And the fact that they skipped it for this might have been like that. But again, this is the early 60s. I don't even know if the Beatles were big by this point when this film came out. Like, they were probably just starting. So I don't know if the charts were a consideration, but it might be one explanation that they just wanted to get it out there in any way they could. Perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know. Just a bit, like you say, a bit weird. If you actually think about it, it's a bit weird, but you're kind of so quick, you just move on.
I just like the idea of like Daniel Craig's Bond listening to You Know My Name. And I'm like, I do know my name. That's me.
On his iPod Touch or something in 2006, yeah.
Yeah, no, one of those like MP3 players that's like 256 megabytes.
Oh, the ones that you always used to get free on like with the newspaper or something.
Yeah, it was just a USB drive with a screen, basically.
Yeah.
And the second thing that stood out to me about this scene, and it happened in the last one as well, the sound effects in this film can be very odd. So in the last scene, when number 3 is talking to Tanya, there's like, she does her whip. Number 3 has a little whip, so not a whip, but you know, like a stick that like snaps. And the sound's really weird. And then we get a very similar sound in this one where Bond's girlfriend reaches for something and then Sean Connery just slaps her hand.
Oh, yeah.
And we just get this really loud slapping sound. And it's like, what? And there's like a few of these throughout the film. They do a few like whipping, slapping sounds, and they're really loud and in your face. They made me laugh every time it happened because you can't miss it.
There are quite a few slaps in this film. Later on, I wrote down that there was a great slap. Like, I don't know. I mean, obviously not the slap itself, but I think it is the sound. You're right. It's like, so it's very crisp. It really stands out. It's kind of like the mask pudding sound effect. You see, it's not that weird.
It's not that, you're right. I'm just more into slapping, I guess. Slappers only.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad that you made that about the game instead of just, don't want people to think you go around just slapping people now.
No. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. So after Bond is summoned, we obviously cut to the offices in London, and we get another Moneypenny Bond scene. Not quite that. There's M as well, and we get... I think there's a couple times it's done this where Bond will start doing his usual sort of flirtiness, and then he's sort of caught out by someone else being there. Obviously M being the one. And so that means that you don't really get much of a... I think you do after the briefing scene, Bond and Moneypenny, but not as much. But yeah, he goes in, and then we sort of get, the briefing scene, the typical Bond template with M about how, there's a strange Russian lady who has fallen in love with him, and how it's quite clearly a trap, but they know it's a trap. They're going to do it anyway, because they really want that lecter, which I still think is a bit of a strange choice. I think they sort of gloss over that being a plot point where it's like, we're just going to do it anyway because we want it. Whereas I'm sure there might have been other options to do. I don't know.
I quite like it, to be honest. And I think the main problem is that they don't actually explain what it is. Like, I don't know what that is. I guess you could kind of guess. All you need to know is it's just a thingamajig, I guess. What, a MacGuffin? really. They just have to
Yeah.
go and get the MacGuffin, because the film itself doesn't say this is why this is important, why we want it. Or if it did, I missed it. I don't know.
They might have said something about the Russian. Sorry, not the Russians. The Americans have been after one for ages, or something like that. Maybe could be making that up though.
It's more about what people want with it, not actually kind of what it is.
Yeah.
But one thing you didn't mention is about this is the first time like Bond throws his hat onto the rack as well.
Oh yeah.
As soon as he enters the room, he throws it on, and it doesn't look like that impressive of a throw to me. I don't want to take anything away from Sean Connery and his throwing skills, but for something that becomes quite iconic, it's a little bit of like he leans forward so much to make the throw that I've made better throws like mucking around in school when everyone's just screwing up balls and trying to throw it into a bin or across the way.
You've heard it here first, folks. Tom thinks he's better than James Bond himself.
Yeah, that's what this podcast's all about, isn't it? That's what we're trying to do.
I will say, I agree, but because it becomes that little thing he does, I always think about the scene in Johnny English where he throws the coat and it just misses and goes out the window.
Yeah, it goes flying out.
that I just love that. So I'm thankful that it led to that anyway.
Yeah, and I also like the dialogue in this one, because when they're talking about it being a trap, and the M is saying to Bond, like, oh, this woman has seen your photograph and fallen in love with you. Who does that? And then Sean Connery or Bond just turns around and says, maybe she's mental. And it's just like, yeah, maybe. And then just move on.
Different times.
It's not wrong, though.
No. Well, yeah, we'll see. And then we kind of mentioned last time that there was a bit of a Q scene in Bond getting his new gun, the Walther, but this time we actually do get the Q scene. Although I don't think he's called Q. I think he's from Q Branch.
Yeah, they just say Q Branch for this film. And
obviously it is the first appearance of Desmond Llewellyn, who sticks around for quite a while in the series. And it kind of starts very, very simply with, as far as gadgets go. No exploding pens or laser cameras quite yet. We're just getting a nice attaché case with dagger in it and some gold coins and a tear gas if you open it a certain way. And what I really like about this is, granted it's all kind of used at once, but Bond actually does use the gadget and it does save his life in the end. So it's nice that you get this and it's not just a joke. It is actually useful to him.
Yeah, all of it as well, right? There's a briefcase that has many different kind of gadgets and things to it, and he uses every single one of them throughout the film, and it's nice to see that, because he's also got that briefcase wherever he goes pretty much, so you get to see it a ton, which I think is really cool. And also I think Agent Grant, I think it's another parallel, I think he has a suitcase as well when he gets onto the train later. So you see suitcases a lot in this film, and because you've had this nice description from Q saying this is what this is and you can use this and this, it's always on the back of your mind, and that makes it more satisfying when all this stuff pays off.
Yeah, it's really bad when you get, and I know there are some films that we'll get to where I don't think a gadget is very well explained and then suddenly it just saves the day. It just kind of feels a bit deflating when you get that. So it is nice, as you say, when something is consistent throughout the film, the audience knows exactly what it is, and so therefore the payoff is all the better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that stood out to me about this scene is there's interesting to see the parallels of, we talked about M and James Bond having that chemistry last time, and this is kind of already in full swing, but he goes straight from talking to M to talking to Q, who he also has a chemistry with and relationship with later down the line, and there's a certain back and forth, but sadly none of that is here. Like, Q is simply just the guy with the briefcase that explains it, where Bond is making kind of jokes and stuff to M, he doesn't do that quite yet to Q. So I don't know at what point that gets fully fleshed out, but for this one we got a very muted Q. So it was exciting to see him, because I was like, yes, Q, awesome. But we do get a very toned down version. He is just a guy who explains what's going on with the gadgets.
Yeah, there's no sort of rapport yet, and no sort of do be careful 007, which is kind of weird, but it does make them seem actually quite professional. just getting on with it.
Yeah, and especially because it does happen in front of M, so I guess it somewhat makes sense. There's no Q branch that Bond goes to report to. He simply, Q is there when M is giving him the lowdown and the brief, and then Q just like, here's the stuff you can use. It all happens in one place, and it happens quite quick.
Yeah, and actually, having said that, I guess there is that kind of element to this film, but it's the Spectre training. That is basically the Q branch. That's what that will become in later films.
Yeah, the silly part, someone using, I think that actually happens, doesn't it? Someone using a flamethrower and it going wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. So we then go on to the next scene, and this made me laugh, and it only made me laugh because we spoke about it. We get another bloody airport scene where the James Bond theme is playing over the top.
Yeah. Yeah, they love their airport scenes, didn't they?
Yeah, it's like, but this is a theme throughout this film, and it happens in Doctor No, but this film in general has a lot more going between locations and things like that, and pretty much any time Bond is seen traveling, they play the James Bond theme. But because I noticed it in Doctor No, and because we talked about it, seeing it here, it's not really that bad, it's not really that distracting, but once you notice it, it's like, okay, they actually only use the James Bond theme for this. Like, you have this great theme, and they only use it for, like, Bond gets a taxi and goes somewhere else. And then when he arrives, it stops.
Yeah, that's true. It didn't last too long, thankfully. And what I did like about this airport scene is it kind of works really well when you've watched Doctor No not long beforehand, where in that film, there's a driver that comes up to him and is like, here's your car for you, and then he goes and checks, and he hasn't actually got a scheduled driver, it's a trap. Whereas in this one, it's like, okay, this time they have a code, so they none of that problem, none of those will happen again.
Yeah, it's a great little progression from that. But what I took away from all this is the parallels to Doctor No are just already really strong. Like, yes, the beginning of the film was a bit different and is a little bit more polished in terms of that James Bond formula. But if you took that stuff out, so much of this stuff is kind of so similar to Doctor No. And the fact that they play the James Bond theme at the exact same moment in the exact same part of the film, and then there's this whole plot that kicks off with this scene is that James Bond is being followed, and then the driver explains that's just how things work here. The location being Istanbul, which is where a good part of this film takes place, or at least everything up to the train takes place in Istanbul. But it's so similar to Doctor No. Like, the Bond getting there, playing the theme, meeting up the driver, going along, being followed, like something's afoot and there's a mystery here. It's just so similar to that film.
Yeah, and actually you could argue the similarities continue when after they're followed through Istanbul, and then you meet the character of Kerim Bey. I don't actually know what he is in terms of like ranking, or if he's just an important person, or is he related to MI6? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think he's directly tied to the British, but obviously is some sort of relationship with them because James Bond goes there. It might be one of those where, like in a previous book or something, it's just a friend of Bond because they obviously did get on very well. I think it's one of those that maybe if you read the book, it would make a lot more sense. But in this film, it's just like, yes, Bond goes and meets up with this Bay character, and then he's his main contact throughout Istanbul.
Yeah. So because I was going to say, I really like this character, who we do see quite a lot of in this film. I found him quite kind of warm and friendly, a very likable character, and that kind of made me just think of that's exactly what we said about Quarrel in the first film. It's very, very similar, where you just have this character that ultimately is a bit expendable, as we find out, but whilst they're there, have a really big presence.
Yes, the impact on the film is quite big. And some of that is because there's not a massive amount of characters in this film. Not that I would say it's a small amount of characters, but in terms of who Bond spends most of his time with, he spends way more time with Bay than he does with Tanya. Like, Tanya being the Bond girl, yes, she does come back and does have a kind of a presence here, but Bay feels like a much bigger character. And the fact that you see his influence on Istanbul and his operation and things like that, it's almost like Bond, I wrote this down later on, but Bond does very little for like, maybe not the first hour, but first like 40 minutes of this film. Because he literally, have a lot going on with Spectre, and they take us through that. Bond then gets the assignment and flies out, and then he follows Bay and goes through his operation. And what the first kind of mini plot is just him, and Bond just kind of happens to be there to help out. And even with the gypsy fight that's coming up later, Bond's just kind of there and just kind of rolls with it. And it's quite interesting to see. It's another reason why I feel like this felt quite similar to the book, because I think if you were writing the film, you would probably make Bond a bigger presence and have him drive the plot forward more, when really he kind of goes on a tour of Istanbul going through everything that's like happening there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think part of that, I don't know how it links up to the book, although I think you are right about the book, but there is that element of Grant is sort of in the footsteps of Bond throughout the whole film, and ultimately, as we've gotten to, makes Bond look a bit amateurish, because he's sort of like Bond's guardian angel at various points in the film, which does kind of, has that sort of leaves that sort of feeling of Bond is just sort of wandering around and not really doing much, and is just sort of winging it because there's this other person taking out all the people and stuff in the background.
Like Bond, they never have him do anything stupid to make Grant look better, which is something I massively appreciate, because obviously that's the easy way out. You just have your main character suddenly just not do things they wouldn't do. But Bond very much acts like Bond, and he's trying to be smart and stay on top of things. It's just we have Grant throughout this film, and we've already got it to where he's actually there at the airport, I believe. And then after this scene, after Bond arrives, Grant then kills, I can't remember who he kills, but he kills someone and then dumps that body off at the Russian embassy.
I think he kills the Russians that were following them, because then it looks like the British have killed the Russians or something like that. It's basically meddling and stirring the pot.
Yeah, it ties into the Cold War stuff, but I think that story literally goes nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And one thing I did think when we got to this part of the film where, we're in Istanbul, we're driving through the streets, and then eventually we go see some of the kind of landmarks of Istanbul as well, is we've mentioned that there's a lot of similarities to Dr. No, but what I really like about this film is it completely goes the other way in terms of locations, where Dr. No primarily set on Jamaica, has a very kind of specific vibe, jungle, trees, tropical, beaches. This is all very kind of city, streets, people, busy, dirty. And I really liked how different it was in that regard.
Yeah, this feels like it's going through the same motions that Dr. No did in terms of showing off Jamaica, but instead we get Istanbul, and like you say, very different location, very different feel. I'm assuming it was picked because it was like the center of the Cold War and it has that really good mix. Like, even though this is called From Russia with Love, as far as I'm aware, Bond or nothing takes place in Russia. It just takes place in Istanbul.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then eventually Croatia, I want to say, is where the ending kind of bit takes place.
Oh, don't ask me about geography. I'm useless. But I will say, I think one of the reasons why this film was picked is because it's one of those things you always hear about John F. Kennedy's. It was in John F. Kennedy's favorite books or something of that year.
Yeah, was it Time magazine or something like that? Yeah,
and that sort of prompted Broccoli and Saltzman to pick this over another one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great choice to go from that Jamaica with Dr. No and From Russia with Love, even though we mentioned it last time, I think. Was this kind of planned out? As far as I can tell, no. From Russia with Love was not picked while they were shooting and planning Dr. No. It was picked after the fact for the reason you just described with JFK. But it actually comes together really well. Like, it's actually a very smart setup and actually a really good foundation, these first two films, for the series, because we get that differences.
Yes, definitely.
So in more parallels to Dr. No, we then get Bond going to the hotel and then taking a look around, checking behind painting, trying to find if there's any bugs. He does eventually find a bug on his telephone, or I believe that's what that is, and then calls up and says, the room won't do, I need to change it out. And then he's saying the bed's too small. The scene's not like a hugely comedic scene, but it did make me smile, to be honest, because he's calling the front desk and the woman is being talked to by the manager. And he's like, just tell him there's no other rooms. Just say it's that or the bridal suite. like that's going to throw him off, like that's going to be enough. He'll never take the bridal suite. And then she's like, well, there's no other rooms but the bridal suite. And he's like, oh, sounds lovely. Excellent. That's that.
Oh, foiled again.
Oh, no, we shouldn't have offered him the bridal suite. They have too good training, these 00 agents.
I was going to say about that scene where he's checking the room for bugs. I really did not like that scene because, and I think it's the same. You're right. I think it's exactly the same as Dr. No, where you have the Bond, or was it the opposite where it had no music in Dr. No? I can't remember now. But anyway, the Bond theme is playing in this scene where Bond is literally just walking around, looking behind picture frames, the telephone, drawers, whatever. Very, very like basic, dull scene, arguably. But you have the Bond theme playing, and not only does the Bond theme play, it just doesn't work at all. But I don't know if you noticed this, or maybe it was just my TV, I don't know. The volume of the Bond music was constantly going up and down. It was really distracting.
I didn't notice that. My notes, I just said it plays for a while, because this is not a short. Like at the airport, it's somewhat short, and he's doing stuff. But this one is just him checking the paintings, and it plays forever, or it feels really long. It
is really long, and maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe the one I watched on Amazon. But to me, it was like, why is it suddenly sort of ducks in volume, and then, he looks behind the photo frame, and it's up again. It's like, well, it doesn't, it seems like a mistake more than anything.
Yeah, this scene is a little bit odd. It didn't kind of click with me too much, because it kind of moves on quite quick. But Dr. No, there's a very real purpose to what they were doing, right? They want to set up this character, Dr. No, make him all mysterious and make sure like there's eyes everywhere and you've got to be careful. And that film is very effective at doing that. This film, I quite like how they go for the angle of everyone is watching everyone at all times. The Russians watch the Turkish people, and the Turkish people watch the Russians. I think that's a really cool spin on it. But you didn't really need the whole, he's been bugged by the Russians or the Turkish people. I'm not even sure who bugged him at this point. It's a little bit confused. And if you kind of cut this scene out, you wouldn't miss anything in this film.
Yeah, that's true, because even the room he does eventually get, the bridal suite, that's also bugged. I mean, it's even worse. It's got a full sort of like one-way mirror thing in it, as we see. So I don't know why they couldn't have just jumped straight to that. Like, and just, yeah, they just watch things. Like, it's not that far of a leap to then need this first bit where it's a bit of a setup to that. One little thing as well, last time you mentioned about noticing all the different fades as transitions in Dr. No. And since you said that, I sort of paid a bit more attention to him this time. And the one that really caught my eye was as he's going up to his hotel room and he goes in the lift, it's like you get an upwards fade. I love it. It's so cheesy.
That's where the budget went, upwards fade. They didn't do that in Dr. No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we can go in different directions now.
So we actually get quite a brief scene. I mentioned about Agent Grant killing somebody. This scene actually takes place after the hotel scene. But we get to see him, I think, for the first time properly in his suit, which is another parallel. Throughout this film, Agent Grant is actually in really nice suits. I don't know if they're the exact same suits that James Bond wear, but they're at least very similar. Because throughout this film, Sean Connery wears the quite iconic at this point, the grey suit. Maybe it's not it's not the most iconic one, but it's quite iconic for people who know this film. And I want to say Grant also wears a lot of grey suits. So we get to see him trying to frame Bond, also looking very good in a suit.
He does look very good in a suit. That is true. So then we cut back over to Karen Bay, who is in his nice house, like hidden behind a wall. There's loads of hidden things. Gotta love it. I think actually, on that note, it's a door, right? I think it's just hidden by like a single bit of cloth, like a curtain. I feel like that probably isn't enough. I don't know. Just think there could maybe be a little bit more discreet with
beads. You're thinking beads?
Yeah, everyone hates those beads going through them. No one would even want to go through, even if they knew. So
you'd see the Spectre agent run into the beads and just get tangled and then just die for some reason.
Not the beads.
Not the beads.
Anyway, Krim is there with his, I don't want to say wife. I think maybe just one of his women. I don't know.
I put random woman. I don't know who she is.
Random woman who's kind of lusting for him whilst he's doing some paperwork or something like that. Kind of getting a bit annoyed with her, even though, come on, she's way above his league. And then we get a nice explosion because it was an assassination attempt, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but the assassination attempt was by the Russians, or was it by Spectre?
I take it as the Russians, and this is, I said earlier about storylines being quite quick and being quite confusing, and you can miss stuff. This is the exact storyline I was talking about. So for the first half of this film, there's this storyline about somebody trying to kill Karim Bey, of which kind of just gets wrapped up quite cleanly, and then they kind of move on. But I take it as the Russian that they see in the next scene when using the periscope. I think it's a periscope.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the one they eventually kill later on. So I take it as him doing it. Exactly why, I don't know. I think it's just meant to be Cold War stuff. The Russians are trying to take out the Turkish are trying to take out the Russians, and they've just hired someone who is a killer to take him out. Again, it doesn't really go anywhere, but I take it as them, and actually Spectre has nothing to do with this bit. Spectre's part of this is simply Grant following Bond around, making sure he's safe to make sure this plan goes to plan, or Spectre's plan goes off.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, either way, Karim Bey assumes it's the Russians, and it's, I wrote down his name somewhere, Krylenko, something like that. Because, yeah, Bond comes along, and they basically go under the city through some reservoirs to go spy on the Russian consulate, because, as Karim Bey says, he managed to get hold of a Royal Navy periscope and had it installed underground right onto the meeting room inside the Russian consulate. And that's where we see some nasty Russians, and one of them is the one that he kind of assumes tried to kill him, who's this very nasty evil man that likes to kill people. Takes pleasure in it, I think he says.
Yes, and again, that character kind of goes nowhere. But we get this kind of scene of them on a boat, and they're going through this like sewer canal to get to this point. Did you notice when the oil went in the water, there was like eels or something around it?
I wondered what that shot was, because I noticed it lingered on that for a few seconds, and I didn't actually know what I was meant to be looking at.
I don't think they're eels, but I put eels because that was the closest I could see. But yeah, you get the zoom in of their ore in the water. And I think it's supposed to show, look how nasty and horrible this water is with these creatures. But I don't know if they ever say what's in the water, and I don't know if you actually really get a proper look, and they don't cut back to it again. So it's just kind of like, oh, I guess there was something in the water. That's strange. And then there's no payoff to it. So it's like, all right, okay. I was just kind of hoping you saw what it is. I should have paused it really, but there's some weird things going on in that water, which I would guess are eels, but this is a sewer, so who knows?
Yeah, that's a bit strange. You're probably right, it is something like that, but then, yeah, why would they not have... I would understand if maybe later on there's a chase and then, someone falls in the water and red starts to appear, the typical thing in the water, but I don't know. I did notice that, but I never actually looked at it properly.
So this was the first part in the Bond follows Krim Rim Bay around. I put his name, as Smiling Man in my notes.
Wait,
he doesn't
I
smile
really
all
want
the
to see
time.
your notes. I really want to see.
But the first time you see him, he's just like beaming. And I was like, Smiling Man.
So your names are based on like first impressions. Blonde, Russian, smiling.
Yeah, basically, you've nailed it.
I like it.
So after that scene, we then get them going to the gypsy camp. Now, I don't really want to touch a lot of this because, yeah, it's probably very offensive to some people. There's no way this kind of holds up, so I don't know if it's really worth going into that bit. I try to just take this scene as it was and just kind of laugh at the absurdity of it, because if you try and take it seriously, it's like, this is probably very offensive to a lot of people.
Yes, I'm not a big fan of the whole gypsy camp scene. I think it gets like you say, it does get quite silly very quickly. It kind of goes from 0 to 100 because, yeah, the premise is Kerim Bey takes Bond to some friends he knows at a gypsy camp, and then they have this whole sort of plot about there's a blood feud thing, and I really just didn't care, and I don't really think it does anything apart from having a reason to have a sort of cat fight on the screen. So that I was not a big fan of, and then yeah, the idea is that whilst Bond is here, I did write down his name. It is Krylenko, yeah, the Russian guy who was trying to kill Kerim Bey. All of him and his cronies come along and attack the camp, and that just leads to this. I just thought it was funny how quickly it just goes from nothing until fire and horses everywhere. It's just mad.
Yeah, so this has the same mentality as what we were saying about the Spectre camp, although even more so, where everything's kind of somewhat calm, I suppose. And then when they attack, it's like, yeah, it reminded me of the Anchorman scene and that Anchorman joke where they're just sitting around saying, that really got out of hand fast. Brick killed a guy. This is basically that. I wouldn't be surprised if they were inspired by this scene, because it goes from just a few people coming in with guns and shooting, which, you know, we've seen shootouts before in Bond. There's lots of them. But as you say, they start burning stuff for no real reason. The horse freaks out. There's two people like wrestling and rolling around with each other quite high up, and then they just fall off for no reason. Mm-hmm. And it's just like... And also it has that music as well, which I don't know if it's the music. I don't know if that gets used in any other Bond film, but it's pretty iconic where you know there's a chaotic mental scene going on screen in this film because a certain soundtrack kicks in, which is like dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
And it just feels crazy.
I'm trying to think what that theme's called, but yeah, it is. It's just, I did, at one point I thought, oh, this is okay. This is all right. I don't mind this. And then it was just like Bond traipsing around, just pushing over some people, and they just like fall over like it's nothing. And it just got a bit too much. The one bit of payoff it did have is kind of you have Grant once again saving Bond's life, kind of taking out someone as he's about to be attacked behind him. So you sort of cement that idea that Grant is a match, he's an equal to Bond, someone to be feared. But I got to say, I was kind of pleased when this scene was over, especially because you had the is it the leader of the camp? Yeah, the guy with the mustache. He sounds like just so over the top. Like, thank you, and it's just all so stupid.
It's so, you know, you put the racist angle to one side for a little bit, and I just think it's hilarious.
Yeah,
I accept it's offensive and not okay. But just like in those moments, he's such a silly character because before, like, yeah, again, like you say, when they're just hanging out and Bond says something nice and he was just like, thank you, ha 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 ha. But then when Bond saves his life and he says thank you, it just sounds like an NPC from a video game.
Yeah.
Like when you have someone just standing there going, oh, help me. And then you like kill the alien or whatever. And he's like, thank you, friend. And then just disappear. Like I expected him to like fade away and you get like 20 points. It felt like that. Yeah.
I think I had a lot better memories of this scene in my head, and then when it came to watching it again now, I just thought, actually that wasn't great.
I can see where you're coming from. It's if you try and take this as a serious action scene, and to be fair, this is like the biggest action scene we've had so far, and it's actually one of the bigger action scenes in the film. There are bigger ones later on that we'll get to, but this is actually the big first gunfight that we have in this film. And from that standpoint, it's a pretty big letdown. But in terms of just being like this chaotic mess, I do somewhat enjoy it still. But it's definitely one you can't take seriously. There's no interesting dynamics going on with the gunfight. There's no good, like, what's that word? Where you try and set up two people fighting?
Conflict?
No, when you like telegraph it, like act it. Never mind. But there's no good like setup and fights. Like there's nothing kind of that good here. It's just chaos, and I do quite enjoy the chaos, but you can't take it kind of seriously in any way. But again, like with all these Bond films, it's kind of up to you personally whether you can get into it, whether this is too far or not far enough. But it's actually not like it's not too far in the same way as, trying to think of an example, like something in a Roger Moore film which would be very silly and
like
and
the laser
like
fights in Moonraker. That just goes so stupid I can appreciate it. Whereas this, it's like I have a feeling it was still meant to be quite impressive. But I didn't think there was any like stunt wise. Nothing stood out to me being like, wow, that's cool. It was just people bumbling around and fires, and I just wasn't great to me.
But I do think about this scene overall because the parallels for Dr. No are quite strong. And obviously nothing like this happens in Dr. No. But we talked about that film, how, the whole idea with Bond at that time was he gets to see all these exotic, unique places, and some of it is supposed to be kind of showing off and people kind of being impressed by that. I do feel like this scene, or at least the first half of it before it kind of all kicks off and fighting breaks out, I want to say it's supposed to be doing the same thing just for Istanbul. Like it's supposed to be like, look at these gypsies and their crazy way of life. And in the cinema, you're going to be like, oh goodness, I can't even imagine such a way of living. These guys are crazy. I feel like it's supposed to kind of be like that, especially because Bond and Bay are like the only people in suits as well. It had somewhat of a similar feel to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Didn't work for me. I know we did forget to say that Karen Bay does get shot, although not really a massive deal in the end. I think his arm is magically healed like 2 scenes later.
Yeah. But also just briefly before we go on to the next bit, it has to be mentioned when the girls are fighting or the women are fighting each other, they literally act like cats. Like actually stretching their hands out and pouncing at each other, and it's very bizarre.
Yeah, it is weird. I guess it was included. I kind of want to say maybe like just to have more women on screen, kind of like you were saying earlier, where it's like, oh, it's a Bond film, we need to have more women on the screen, but because it wasn't. It was just weird. It wasn't like a cool fight or anything. It's just strange.
Yeah, my note was, is this meant to be sexy or intense? Because I couldn't figure it out. Because obviously, like they're not really even wearing that much, and obviously, catfight, it has that stigma behind it. But the music is actually quite intense when they're kind of fighting each other. So I really don't know what they were going for there.
Yeah, me neither.
Then this whole segment kind of ends with the 2 women are grateful for Bond, and now they're yours to decide what to do with. Okay.
Yeah, so once again, it's just Bond just laying down. I think one of them's sewing his sleeve and the other one, I don't know, feeding him or something. I can't remember. But just another kind of like, oh, okay, right, let's move on.
Yeah, I don't know if the implication is that he actually slept with them both, but it seems like that's what they were going for. And it's just really kind of unnecessary, especially how they were fighting each other earlier. It's just, it goes into how this is actually probably pretty offensive. But also in terms of the film itself, even putting that bit aside, it's just very bizarre. It doesn't feel like Bond being cool and kind of, meeting a woman and seducing her. It's just like these 2 women who are fighting each other like, yay, Bond, let's do his nails. It's just, I don't get it.
Yeah. Although I will say, we go from that whole gypsy camp scene, which I didn't love, to a scene that I actually think was really good and I kind of forgot about to an extent, which is where Karen Bay wants his revenge on Krylenko. Keep forgetting his name. So it's sort of like the assassination of that character, and it's not a very long scene. It's basically just them waiting outside of a building. I think they're Karen Bay's sons who are dressed up as policemen.
If it's an extra character that's helping out, it's one of his sons.
It's one of his sons, yeah, which I quite like that. They go and knock on Krylenko's door to sort of force him to use the escape hatch, which just so happens to be the side of this massive billboard. Funnily enough, did you know, I read this, that is a real film that was produced by MGM.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but it makes sense.
Yeah, was it MGM or it might have been Eon? But yeah, and like the character on there, I can't remember what the film's called now, but it was sort of a bit of a nod to another film they had out, which is kind of cool. Yeah, so he escapes out of where the mouth is on this big old billboard, and Karen Bay and Bond are there, and Bond lets Karen take the shot with his sniper rifle that was in his Q briefing scene. And I think, as I say, very simple scene. But the thing that stood out to me is just it had quite a good amount of tension to it, and I really liked the lighting with the grate, like the window with the crisscross pattern on it. I just thought it looked a little bit artsy to me. It looked a little bit nice, especially coming from the scene before with the camp on fire and everything.
Yeah, it's nice to have this quiet scene. And I put down the exact same thing. I feel like with Dr. No, it never really got that tense for me. And I like the atmosphere of Dr. No and how that film plays out and all the things it puts in there. I think it is still effective at what it does. But this film in general, despite having the higher budget, it still, I would say, has a lot more tension with scenes like this. Even though you have the chaotic one. This one, I would say this scene is more tense than anything we ever saw in kind of Dr. No. And it just kind of proves how effective this scene was for something so simple. They just go to a billboard, they get the sniper rifle, they set it up, they get the guy out and he shoots him. And that's that. But again, there is a really nice tension and build up here.
And it had a great line as well.
It's the first joke that makes sense from James Bond.
I knew you were going to say something about that.
Because none of them in the last film made sense. They were just like vague references to it. But this was a proper joke that actually made sense in context. And I was like, I knew that you had it in there, James. I knew this was coming. It's nice to see them actually like be able to write a joke.
Wow. High praise there. High praise, yeah. Yeah, she should have kept her mouth shut. So nice and simple. But as you say, it works. It works.
It makes sense. That's all I want. I didn't laugh at it. I don't think it's a good joke. I don't think it's funny. There's a lot of films about this film, or a lot of moments in this film and Dr. No that makes me laugh. But these lines don't make me laugh. I just enjoy them. And I just like it when they make sense. And this one finally did.
I think for me, it had a brief, like a small exhale from my nose reaction. About that level.
Wow. You say high praise, but you're just coming out with this.
Yeah, it gets better at least, doesn't it? I suppose it gets better.
Do you want to know what happens next, Joe?
Go on, then.
James Bond travels somewhere, and the James Bond theme plays over the top of it.
You're joking.
I know. Mixing it up.
Where does he travel to?
The hotel.
Ah, yes.
And he orders breakfast.
I did write about this actually, about specifically the breakfast thing, because I did like how it was very literary Bond to me. Ian Fleming was obsessed with writing about Bond's food and his drink, obviously, but food particularly, and yeah, especially breakfast, different types of eggs or whatever, or I think in this case it was figs. And strong black coffee. And I just thought, like, yeah, that's kind of nice. You know, they are keeping that element of Bond's fancy breakfast that no one watching the film would ever, you know, who has figs for breakfast? I mean, really. But, you know, Bond does.
I'm surprised he didn't order a martini. Like, that was the shocking thing. He ordered actual food this time at the hotel.
Maybe a Bloody Mary?
Yeah, he probably did. Probably got that later.
Yeah.
But I really like that he was checking the briefcase, and I also like that. Again, it's nice that they show it again, but this kind of idea of Bond having countermeasures to people trying to go after him and look at his stuff, it's straight from Dr. No. It's just kind of an evolved version of it, where before it was a hair and some powder, but this time it's him checking for bugs and having this briefcase. So it's another strong tie to that film, but you get that clear sense of progression with the briefcase, which I thought was quite nice.
Yeah, as you say, the more you see it in the film, the more it pays off.
Absolutely. And then we get another small towel. I don't think it was a small towel as the first one, but we do get Sean Connery in a small towel.
We do, and a bath that steams instantly. I could not believe how much steam came from that bath within seconds. They have some hot water there in Istanbul.
Oh yeah. So this was a little bit surprising. So this is when Tanya finally reveals herself and you see Bond kind of looking and seeing her getting to bed. But she was like completely naked, right? And they like barely hide it at all. You just see it through like a filter. But I was like, that's actually quite surprising to see. I know James Bond is like all about sexy women not wearing much, but this is, as far as I can tell, just straight up a naked woman just getting into bed, and they barely censor it or hide it at all.
I'm going to be honest. I did pause to double check this. Not
For
being
research purposes.
For research. I'm not a creep. I promise you. Because I was kind of a bit taken aback like that, like you were just saying. I thought, am I seeing that? Maybe she's just got underwear on. But no, she is like, there is a bottom on display.
I'm assuming that's how they get away with it, because even then, these old Bond films are like PGs. For people who don't know what I'm talking about, if you're not English, basically PG is parental guidance, so it's the one below 12 in the UK, so it's a lower than a 12. I don't know about this film in particular, but normally these old James Bond films are lower than a 12. So apparently they don't consider it proper nudity, even though it's like just straight up a naked woman getting into bed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you say, there's a sort of black filter of the window or whatever, the door, wherever it is, but you can see it quite clearly if you try. So that was a bit like, oh, okay. And come to think of it, there are a couple times as well in other films where if you were to freeze frame at a particular moment, they get away with a fair amount.
Yeah, it's just surprising. That's it. You know, obviously Bond, this is part of his thing. It was just quite surprising to see this like so blatantly. I can't imagine there's any other as blatant example as there's in any of the other films.
Yeah. But the scene itself where Bond, walks in and finds Tanya in the bed. I gotta be honest, I didn't like this scene. And in fact, I think this is the start of me just not really liking the character of Tanya at all, really. I think the thing that really I don't like is that, so she's a Russian, she works for Russia, she's Russian, and she's being involved in this plot about pretending to fall in love with Bond and defect. And the thing that I think kind of throws me, maybe she's just she's just really good at her job, but as an audience, I don't think we really ever see any sort of side of her that's like feeling uncomfortable about this, or that maybe she's having second thoughts about it, or maybe thinking about the bigger picture. Like, she just does what she's told and pretends to love James Bond. And to me, it just made it feel like just not a very complex character.
I completely agree. It seems like they laid the foundation for her to be a more complex character because she's being deceived, but she's loyal to Mother Russia or the Soviet Union or whatever, but she's being deceived, and there's perhaps some sort of payoff that might happen with that, and that could be quite interesting because clearly she has some type of a personality because she's like dedicated to this to the point where she would do this super secret mission and pretend to be in love with James Bond, and that's quite interesting. And then you could, even if you go down the standard route of, then she actually does fall in love with James Bond, which I think happens. It's not particularly clear.
Yeah.
There is kind of potential there, but like you say, I don't know if it was the way the character was written or if this actress just wasn't very good, or maybe she was too good. I couldn't figure it out. It's one of the two. But she always comes across, and it's similar to me as kind of Honey Rider a little bit, where she always just comes out as kind of dumb. Like, she never you don't see that other side of her enough to make her, like you say, be a complex and interesting character. She just kind of goes along for the ride and just seems quite stupid. And again, there's a plot reason why she's acting stupid, but it just you don't get any payoff to it. She's just kind of dumb throughout this film.
Which is a shame, because when we first see her, when she's getting briefed by Kleb, I think, like you say, I think she was set up to be a bit more nuanced. And it just doesn't really go anywhere.
No, yeah, like it feels like it would have been quite easy to do a payoff to it later in the film. I don't know if they cut that out because the second half of the film is more action oriented, but for the ending to kind of make sense with Tanya and Bond getting together, you need that extra little bit. And without that extra little bit, it just doesn't work. And a lot of the time Tanya's on screen, she's fine. It's just, that's it. She doesn't really add enough to this film.
No. And then in the hotel room, surprise, surprise, they make love, and there is the hidden camera, which I think Thinking back to it now, that must have been one of the references in Die Another Day, because it's the exact same thing. But also, they're being filmed, which is kind of called back on later on in the film, but really not that much. So I was just, when I was watching, I was like, oh, okay, they're being filmed. And then that's obviously where the scene ends and it just moves on. It's a bit strange.
Yeah, I did like that little touch just because of how creepy it is. And it makes Spectre feel so creepy and weird. Like it separates them from the Russians and things like that, to the fact that they would actually do this. I don't know why they're doing this, and I still don't know why they really did it, but it's very kind of creepy and unsettling. So I think that's kind of effective. And it also kind of reminds you of, Spectre is pulling the strings here and in control. So I think it is effective in terms of helping set up Spectre and carry on that thread and what they are to this film. But yeah, it's just a little bit unsettling and odd when you first see it.
So does that mean that is Spectre recording them. So does that mean that it was also Spectre who had bugged the phone in his other room? And so does that mean that the people working downstairs and the guy on the phone telling him about the bridal suite, they're also in on it with Spectre?
I mean, that's the only way this makes sense, right? I can't think of another way they would be able to set it up.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I never really kind of connected the dots that far, which I think says something more about me than the film, but yeah.
I mean, they don't linger on it because I'm the same. What you're saying totally makes sense. But it makes sense that the manager would be linked up to Spectre because that's the only way Spectre would be able to set that thing up.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that the manager would then tell Bond, they blatantly bug his room. And it makes sense that he would say, you can only have the bridal one because that's where the setup is. So there is like logic there, but I don't think the film really kind of gives you time to put that together in a way where you would think about it and say, oh, okay, that's what this plan is.
Right. Thank you for making me feel not so stupid.
I had one other question, though, about this scene, because it's a callback to an earlier one. There is a scar at the bottom of Bond's back that both women touch. Do you know what that scar is?
I didn't really put much thought into it. Is it meant to be a scar from Dr. No?
I would assume so, but when did he get shot on his lower back? Or, like, damaged on his lower back? I'm not too sure when that happened.
I'm not sure. I suppose I just sort of assumed it was maybe just, in one of his assignments. But then we didn't see it in Dr. No.
No, it's like, why have it? Like, if it didn't come from Dr. No, why have it? Because they focus on it. You see it twice. There are two scenes where they kind of focus on it and call it out. And I guess she does touch it to say, oh, I know that's you. It's just, it seems like they would have tied that to Dr. No because there's so many things in this film that does tie back to Dr. No. So I guess there is a plot reason of Tanya knowing the scar is there and touching it. But still, it seems like it should have tied back to that first film somehow.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what would have been a good time to sort of call it back to in the film. But I'm sure there's something.
This next scene confused me quite a bit. So this is the scene where I don't know what you would describe this area as. At first, I thought it was a cathedral, but I don't think it is. I think it's just kind of a very big open space with these nice pillars and architecture. Maybe it is a cathedral. I can't think what else it would be.
Oh, I looked this up because I wondered myself. It's a mosque. I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong probably, but like Hagia Mosque or something.
Okay.
Hagia Mosque. Yeah, one of the like a big landmark in Istanbul.
Yeah, it felt quite religious, but yeah, obviously, yeah, if it's not Christian, then that makes sense. So this scene confused me quite a bit because we have Bond, we have Tanya, we have, I forgot his name, the agent guy, and then we have a Russian person who has been following Bond this whole time. And I don't quite get what the plan was for this scene because Bond and Tanya slept together, but I'm pretty sure Tanya is trying to give Bond the map to where the machine is that he's trying to get in the Russian embassy. But she puts it down, and then a Russian man comes, and then the agent guy kills him, and then Bond shows up and takes it and says, that's weird, there's a dead Russian guy, and then that's that. But I don't understand why Tanya can't just go up to Bond and say, well, here's the thing that you want.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know either. I really don't. I know that there's like a sort of effort to show that they shouldn't be seen together too much. later on as well. They do that, but why do they have to go to a big public space and put it down behind a pillar? I don't know. I really don't. I think it was a cool scene in so much as, again, showing Grant being one step ahead of Bond, and making Bond look kind of just sort of happy-go-lucky, like, oh, someone died. That's lucky. But maybe they just wanted to show off more of Istanbul. I don't know.
It definitely felt like that. Like, it don't feel like let's show off this. We're in Istanbul. There's a really cool location. We want another scene where we can set things up for the future. It felt like that's all it kind of was. There was some nice kind of tension and things in there, though, because you have a tour guide giving someone around. So as all these kind of agents and people with guns or dangerous people are kind of moving around and all these different pieces, you hear this echo of this tour guide. And as the scene goes on, it gets kind of quieter and quieter. And because it's getting quieter, it's kind of heading towards something. So again, it's really kind of smart filmmaking from that sense, which is something I said before. I think this film does tension a lot better than the last film. And I think this is another example of that. It just kind of feels like this scene in the grand scheme of things, it could have been kind of cut out, because it's just like she just has to, or in terms of the logic of the film, she just has to get Bond a map that she could just do normally, you would imagine, because she broke into the hotel room. So if she could do that, then why couldn't she get him the map? But I think this scene by itself is still quite effective and it's still quite enjoyable.
Yeah, and it helps. It's something that's quite funny, really, if you think about the Bond character and what he eventually becomes in some of the films, which is basically this amazing, supernatural sometimes man that can do everything and never get injured and never do anything wrong. The actual series, if you think of Dr. No and this one, there's a lot of times where Bond is not infallible. He maybe not making mistakes, but he's not on it in the same way. Like in this scene where there is that weird Russian character that's also there, which Bond didn't know about, and it was only because of Grant that he ended up getting the plans to the consulate. And I just really like that they put this effort towards giving Bond a bit of a weakness.
Yeah, and it's not Bond being stupid or dumb, as I said before. It's just this other person seems to be kind of better than him, and there's just so much kind of going on, and this is just kind of how it all kind of pays off. Like you say, it just works really well. They get that balance right in this film.
Yeah. So then he picks up the little thing which has the consulate blueprints, the floor plans on it, so then he knows where to steal the Lecter from. And I think after that, we then move on to, are they on the boat after that?
Yes.
Yeah, which again is just a bit more of them sneakily talking to each other, not trying to look too obvious. Don't know why they have to be on a boat in that case, but anyway. And Bond has a little sort of recording camera gadget, and is just sort of getting more information about the Lecter from Tanya. And the scene itself, fine. Nothing too special, really. Again, you're just seeing nice backdrops of Istanbul, which is very, very nice scenery. But we do have a quick interlude of back in London, back in M's office, with everyone listening in to what she's saying. And a nice little gag with M in Tokyo with Bond, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, I actually quite like this scene. It's not one that really cracked me up and made me laugh, but similar to how we had certain moments in Doctor No that was purely a comedy scene and purely supposed to be comedic, this is probably the most comedy focused scene in the entire film, because it's quite silly them being on this boat and then them cutting to M and everyone kind of listening, and then Tanya saying like kind of inappropriate things. Although to be fair, it did make me laugh when she was like, "Will you make love to me back on England?" And then Sean Connery's delivery of the next line, "Day and night." Like he just says it instantly and then gets back to what he's saying. Like the comedic delivery is actually surprisingly really good, and that line in particular did make me laugh.
Yeah, it's a good little scene for that. I just think them actually on the boat. Something else that threw me off, I think, is just how obvious it was that they were just not in the same scene together. You could see that. I think the character of Tanya was probably, well, it looked like she was actually there, whereas with Bond it was clearly pick up shots with a kind of projection, and and also his shot seemed a lot lower quality. I don't know what was going on with the film, but it just didn't work back and forth. To me, it was just a bit too different.
I noticed that as well. I put blurry, but it wasn't really blurry. It was just low quality. Just the shots where it was just Sean Connery zoomed in just seemed worse, and it was just very odd, especially when you're on a bigger TV when it jumps between the two, because there's such a clear difference there.
Yeah.
So after all that, we finally get to what I'm going to call the heist, I guess.
Yeah.
You don't see a massive amount of planning into actually getting this done. You more just kind of see it all kind of execute, which I think works well. Bond it's not Ocean's 11 or anything like that. You just kind of want everything to kind of go off. But something I do kind of really like, a small detail that is easy to miss, where they talk about what day are we going to do this? What day are we going to break in and steal the machine? And they're like, the 13th? It's like, no, we should say the 14th. And then when he does kind of break in and eventually meet up with Tanya, she's like, but it's the 13th. So actually Bond very purposely deceives her by saying it's going to be the 14th that we're going to do this thing, but they do it a day early just to, I guess, make sure she's okay, or kind of, she knows it's happening. She just doesn't know it's that day. So I guess if it is a trap, which we know they think it is a trap, that's them somewhat trying to make sure everything's all right by doing it a day early.
Yeah, it's a very easy detail to miss. I think I might have rewound and kind of listened to it back when Bond's talking to Karen Bay and he says about the date, because you're right, like it makes a ton of sense why they would do that, and it's quite a clever thing, but it's literally like you could blink and miss that if you weren't really paying attention.
Yeah, but it's nice for those people who do kind of pick up on it. It doesn't have a big impact, but it's kind of a nice little detail. And again, it makes Bond seem smart and competent, which is something you spoke about in the last one, where it's nice to see Bond thinking things through and making kind of smart choices when he's coming up with these ideas.
Yeah. So Bond heads into the Russian consulate and sort of has I guess a bit of a gag with the clock, and is the time right on the clock, matching up to 3 p.m. when the explosive's underneath, which was kind of like, okay, yeah, that was set up quite nicely because we saw them spy on it previously, so we know that there is those tunnels underneath. That blows up, which sort of just creates general chaos again, kind of like the gypsy camp scene, people running around like headless chickens, and that gives Bond the chance to head into the room and grab the Lecter.
Oh, God. I mean, I don't have too much to say about this actual scene, but when they go back into the sewers, because you have the rats. And I wouldn't say I'm afraid of rats, but I don't like rats. I'm not a fan of rats. Ratatouille, not my favorite Pixar film. For me. I think it's a bit overrated. And we get this very somewhat disconnected shot, because the whole point here is that they're in the sewers for a lot of this. So they're able to get around Istanbul through the sewers and be sneaky. So their plan is to go off through the sewers, set off this bomb, steal it, and then escape through the sewers after they set off tear gas in it. But when they go back down and they turn like round the corner to escape, there's this like, what's the term? Not a horde of rats, but a pack of rats. And it's so many rats, and the sound of them, just like these other sound effects, it's really loud. And it sounded like angry high-pitched rain, because there's just so many insane, like there's just an insane amount of rats there. And even though they don't really react too much to me, I was like, oh God, what? Why is there so many rats? That's horrible. I don't like this.
It was a little bit weird. I think the thing that sort of lessened the impact for me is that it was so clearly a different shot, and it just didn't match the scenes before it. But it was good. I did really like the music of. I think it was the same music as the. Was it the same music as the other? It's like that kind of very generic action-y Bond music.
So not the Gypsy Camp 5 music, you're saying a different one?
I think it's a different one. I think. I should have, I just put great music in my notes, but maybe I should have put a little bit more.
I mean, I can't think of it exactly, but I do kind of agree with the general sentiment of overall in this film, it has great music. I don't think there's anything that's really bad. And actually they use music a lot more in this film than Dr. No, and to kind of great effect. So yeah, again, unfortunately, I can't quite remember what plays there, but I do know throughout this music, it's really solid.
This was just a little point where I was saying about Karen Bay's arm. Like, he's climbing upstairs, no problem now. He was shot he was shot in the arm like 2 days ago, and it's fine.
Yeah, I guess you would somewhat assume there's like time skips going on here. They don't say that, they don't make that clear, and no one ever says, we'll do it in a month's time. But I get the kind of general impression is that, again, they're trying to take the book and condense it down and have everything that happens in the book. So watching this film, it feels like it takes place after like 2-3 days, but it probably does take place over the course of a month of Bond exploring Istanbul, getting familiar with everything, and then talking to them, setting up this plan, setting a date for the plan, then executing the plan to steal it, then escaping. I take that as probably taking over a much longer period of time than what's presented in this film.
Tom, that's far too sensible.
Oh, very sorry.
How dare you?
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's like the Lord of the Rings thing, right? They give it actually takes place over like months and years, but they just give the impression of it's very short in order to keep up the pacing of the film and to make it feel like it's continually moving forward.
Yeah, it would have been a bit weird if we had 5 months later as a title card.
So we're finally here. We're finally at this moment. Now, in my head, I have the train section being halfway in the film. But looking at my notes, there's no way that's the case. We must be, like 2/3 through it, at least?
I think it's pretty much bang on 2/3, it looks like, for my notes. So, yeah.
So they eventually, straight away after escaping from the sewers, they all run and grab this train. And we see a Russian guy get on the train, and we also see, I can't remember, what's the agent's guy's name again?
Grant.
It just says blonde man in my notes. I can't remember.
Grant.
Grant, yes. And then we just see Grant get on the train. So it's a really nice setup. When I saw this train scene or saw them all get in, it made me excited. I actually couldn't remember what happens on the train, but I was like, it's the train. It's the train from Russia with Love. I was just like excited to see where this kind of goes. But in that moment, I actually couldn't remember what happens on the train at all.
The thing I wrote down here, and it's just so true, it's just Bond films with train scenes in them, it's just something about it. It just feels right. And especially when you have these sort of like old trains with the little cabins and everything and the dining cars. I love it. I absolutely love it. I just love the whole vibe of train scenes, and it kind of extends into like when there's like train levels in the video games of them. I love that too. Everything about it. I'm so set up to be an old man and love trains. Not just because of Bond, but that does help.
Well, not some British trains. They're quite different, some of those.
Yeah, it has to be like the Orient Express or something, maybe.
Yeah. But it's just such a smart way of doing it, because there's like this tension with everyone being stuck in a small place, but also having that place move at a high speed. I feel like kind of like there's a instinctual sense of kind of dread that comes with that. Imagine being trapped on somewhere that's so kind of big but also feels small but also going quite fast, because this is one of those kind of old trains where everyone has their own sort of little area or cabin and things like that, and then the outside corridor is really small and thin, which I think is a really effective space in terms of trying to make up a tension or create tension in a scene, because you can't really get out or escape. And yes, maybe you have your own little area, but you're kind of trapped in that area, and it's something that the film uses to great effect later on in a fight scene.
That is absolutely spot on, because one thing I noticed with this is just the amount of times that they have the characters stop when people walk past, and like a definite effort to make it look like it is cramped. It's busy. There's people walking past. They have to stop talking about something because there's someone nearby, or it's a waiter or something like that. It's all these little bits that come together, like you say, to just have this sort of feeling of, eventually that feeling of like dread. But yeah, just that there's something that's going to happen on this train. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, all the pieces are in place, and you're just waiting for it to all kind of go off, which is a great feeling for these sort of films. So we have another scene with Tanya. So Tanya and Bond are hanging out in the cabin, and she's still doing that I'm in love with you routine and just swooning, and she puts on her dress, and I just put her dress is stupid because I was like, what a stupid dress.
Whoa.
I really didn't like this scene at all.
I tell you what I didn't like, and it's something I had been noticing up until this point, but it was this bit that made me actually think, oh yeah, I've got to write this down. Because it's a bit of like it's a bit of a cliche and a bit of a joke to do an impression of Sean Connery now and just go,
Go on. Go on.
Just go.
Let's do it.
Like, yes. But he does go yes very creepily a lot of times in this film.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times. And it's just a little bit like, ugh, just kind of makes me, ugh, just the way he does it. But
how does he do it again? I forgot.
he goes, yes. But this is
Are
one
you
of those
going on
scenes.
Fiverr with this? There's something there.
Hey, I could do some extra income. I would agree. I mean, at this point, they're meant to be in sort of disguise as husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Somerset or something like that, heading back to England. But this is what I mean by, like, the character to me is just too far gone. The character of Tanya, where it's just, at this point, she's really just kind of not adding much to me.
No, she's just acting like a teenager. It's somewhat what I have problems with Honey Rider, which I've already said. And in that episode, we talked about, is she of age? How old is she? Now, we know Tanya is of age because she works for, she's a Russian industry or things like that. So we know that's okay. But she does just act like a stupid teenager. Even if you're someone in love with someone, you wouldn't act like this. You wouldn't be like, oh, James, do you like my dress, James? It just doesn't work. I mean, I guess grand scheme of things, it's a small part of the film. It's just the wasted kind of opportunity. And maybe it's the dubbing. You mentioned last time about the dubbing, and actually this woman or this actress was also dubbed for this film.
Yeah.
And it was actually quite noticeable for me in this film, which also, again, doesn't help with the character.
Yeah, another character dubbed. I think for me as well is, like, is it now meant to be the point where she really is falling in love with James? I know we did say earlier, is there that point does happen at somewhere in the film, but if it's now and this is like genuine love and she's not doing an act, it's just not, it's not clear, and it's kind of a little bit silly, a little bit cringy.
Yeah, I don't think it's now because she acts very like sad and disconnected when they're at the dinner scene later. So I think it's meant to be after that. But even then, it's not clear. I
know we're kind of jumping ahead a bit, but I did not understand why she was like that then. Was there a reasoning for that?
Let me... I put in my notes, Bond gives the woman a good shake and slap, so that might be some of it.
Right.
Again, it's another slap with a great loud slap sound. It's not a very nice scene, but still, how loud that slap is, I enjoyed.
That's right. I suppose, yeah, we are jumping ahead a little bit, but on the train, Karen Bay's there. The Russian guy that saw them at the train station's there, and we sort of leave them two characters together because we've got to wait until 6 p.m. or something like that before they can escape. So Karen Bay looks after that guy and makes sure there's no trouble with him. And then, what do you know? He dies. Both die. Shocking.
It's such a shame, like, with the... Well, it's a great scene and kind of great moment, but you get such a funny moment with Bay where they, like... He was like, I'll keep our friend company. And then they do the old pull the jacket down the side, has stuff his face. And then he just has the gun. And I want to say get the cigarette out because we haven't spoken about it, but this is another film where everyone is just smoking the entire time. It's just what you do.
Yeah.
But then he just sits down saying, I have a very good life story for you. You see, it all started. It's such a great little moment. And it kind of, I think it's smart because you get this funny, nice character kind of moment with him that you enjoy. But of course, the very next time you see him, it turns out that they've both been killed, and it kind of makes it hit a little bit more similar to Quarrel, where you're just like, oh, man, that's a bummer. I really like that guy.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that character, I think, of Karen Bay, where he just, when you do see him eventually stabbed with a knife in his back, you just think, oh no, not why now? Like, you kind of want him to be in the rest of the film, which is always a good sign. Didn't sort of outstay his welcome or anything. So, they both end up discovered killed, and that's when Bond, as you say, goes back and gets slap happy with Tanya.
Yeah, so he basically tries to say, like, I know this is an act, which is another interesting thing about this film, and they did this in Dr. No to a certain extent as well. You don't really know when Bond is pretending to go along with something or when he simply doesn't know that there's something else going on. Now, you know to a certain degree their stuff is missing because he doesn't know who's trying to save him and he doesn't know about Spectre, as we find out later, or anything like that. But it's sometimes like you don't know when Bond knows when she's faking it, although they do know that it's a trap, so I'd assume he always kind of knows. But that's the question. Like, that's what I think is quite interesting about the character, or at least how Sean Connery plays him. Sometimes he can feel like a little bit dumb, but then later there's a small moment where you're like, actually, no, he kind of knew the whole time. And they kind of play with your expectations to the point where you don't know what Bond knows. You just know he's somewhat capable, so he probably knows some of this stuff.
Yeah, I suppose so. Sort of like, it reminds me of that bit in Friends where it's like, they don't know that we know that they know that we know. So you sort of sometimes have to read it back and think, okay, so he's yelling at Tanya because he's aware that it's a trap. It's like, okay, so it is a trap. But then I've already lost my own train of thought. See, I can't keep up with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole point. You're not really meant to... You could think about it to the point where you can probably roughly figure it out when Bond knows stuff and when he doesn't know stuff. But it's actually a really smart device in a spy film like this, where actually you're not fully aligned with Bond, and it kind of gives a nice kind of tension to certain scenes and things like that, and having Bond kind of be his own character and own perspective. I think it works really well with these films, and it's not something I kind of had considered about these films until doing this rewatch. And
speaking of tension, we do get what I think when I thought about this film and the reasons why I liked it beforehand, there was one very specific shot that was in my head that I remember really liking. As we mentioned, Grant, the Spectre agent, is on the train as well. And eventually the train stops where Bond is supposed to meet someone, what's it called? Station Z or something like that. One of the British informants working abroad sort of thing, to continue the escape back to London. And you kind of get, as Bond is walking along the platform trying to find his informant, you get this really cool shot of Grant walking alongside Bond in the train, sort of going from window to window between them and hiding. And it's such a cool shot because it's one of the first times I can think of a shot actually being so specifically set up to be sort of artistic and purposely cinematic, you know. Which obviously Bond films will have a lot more in the future. But with these early films, a lot of it is very simple camera shots and camera angles. This one really stood out to me.
Yeah, it feels fantastic because it ties into, throughout this entire film, we have seen Grant always kind of being there. But he's actually been quite distant, and we know that he's on the train. But even with him being on the train, you don't really see him all that much up to this point. You just kind of know he's there. And also you know that he's killed Bay and the Russian guy because, you know, who else would do it? I don't think they specifically say, but there's like, of course he did it. But this is kind of the first time where you see him as close as that. And it kind of also kind of foreshadows the fact that they are going to meet soon, because throughout this film, he's kind of been getting closer to closer, and seeing him be that close, you're like, okay, this is starting to go down. So as well as kind of looking like a fantastic sort of scene, the build up to this scene is also very important. And it also sets up the next section with Grant very nicely.
It does, yeah, because you do eventually see him sort of looming in the background once Bond has done his, I think it's one of Karen Bay's sons he's talking to. And kind of giving him the news about, oh wait, hang on, I'm getting mixed up because I was talking about his informant. Which one's first? Is it meeting his son or meeting the other guy?
I'm not too sure, because I think the Grant gets off the train first. No, he can't do, because Sean Connery's off the train first. Do they stop twice?
I think they stop twice, yeah, because
I think they stop once to meet the sun, and that's where we get the shot with Grant going through the train, and then we get another nighttime scene where they stop again, and that's when Grant gets off first.
Yeah, because this first time where Bond is talking to Karen Bay's son, who was meant to be meeting them there and everything, that's when you kind of realise that Grant is watching to learn of the code that was referenced right at the beginning of the film at the airport with the whole need a lighter or a match, and a lighter's far better, that sort of line that it does. And it's only because he's there watching them that he knows how to use that for the next time they stop the train, and basically take the disguise of the English agent.
Yeah, because the whole point in this film now is that they have the codex, whatever it is, and they're purely trying to get back, which also is quite nice because it simplifies the film massively. Like, there's all these little kind of things going on, but Bay has been killed and stuff, so the characters are quite limited. So it's actually quite a simple setup, but they add all these little kind of ways of building the tension and having all these kind of payoffs that is really smart. So we get this next scene where it's in Zagreb in Croatia, I believe. It shows footage of the train, and then it has a faded-in version of a map, and most of that stuff I was like, what am I even looking at?
Yeah.
But I've been to Zagreb, so I was like, I know where that is. That's Croatia. So I knew that at the very least.
I just assumed that most of the names I was seeing on that map, it's like they're not called that anymore. I just thought
That's a good point. Yeah, it might not have even been Croatia at that point.
I have no clue.
But I also really like how simple this is. They don't fully explain what's happening, but basically Grant gets off the train very quickly and then gets into his disguise, which is really just him, basically, in his full suit, because this whole time he's still been in the full suit, and then gets onto the train pretending that he was already there. It's very basic, but again, it's one of those things that these early films do very well, where it's just people kind of being smart and just having kind of good ideas and kind of framing that in a good way to try and trick each other. And I kind of really appreciated this simple wrinkle to this game.
Yeah, it just goes to show that he's just as good an agent as Bond. He's able to identify all the things, that all the codes and everything, and go and take the appearance of the English agent, sneak back on the train. Well, actually, no. Then he goes up to Bond, doesn't he, and does the whole need a light sort of thing.
Yes,
and that's what gets him on the train into the next scene of pretending to be English.
So now we finally get to this bit where they've met up. Grant is now Captain Nash. Well, that's who he's pretending to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a wonderful performance, I think we can all say.
I really wasn't sure whether the actor who played Grant was English, and just because like it is such a bad English accent, I thought, well, is it because he's English and able to do a really bad English accent, or is it because the actor was actually not English and therefore the English accent is bad, sort of just as a byproduct? Turns out he is actually English. But yeah, he has this really sort of, it's just like kind of grating accent, I thought, which was good.
No,
it worked for the character.
I loved it. It's so over the top and silly. I just couldn't help but be like, yes, this is what I want. Why doesn't Bond speak like this?
I think it worked in the context of the film, being that this is I don't know if we ever know what, is he Russian? I don't know.
I believe they said he's Bulgarian.
Bulgarian, oh okay, I missed that.
Like at the very start of the film when they're talking about him, I think they tell number 3 is Bulgarian.
So I kind of like that, yeah. You know, he's going to be putting on an accent, but he might have ham it up a bit because he doesn't quite know where the line is. I don't know, but it does make for quite funny. I just think like having Bond next to this so obviously terrible accent, it's just kind of funny to me.
I don't know if this is something where, similar to Dr. No, and I can't remember what I was talking about here, where it was the professor in the last film, where his acting is so over the top and hammy, it kind of tells the audience that Bond knows this is no good and that he's lying. Like it kind of gives us what the character is thinking. I do kind of wonder if they were trying for the same thing where, well, obviously Bond would know that's not his British accent is kind of nonsense. So this was their way of hamming it up to tell the audience that Bond is not at least 100% fooled, that Bond probably does know something is up. Again, just trying to make sure that Bond doesn't look stupid in these situations. Because if you were to believe that Bond 100% believes all of this, then yes, he does look a bit silly.
I mean, I would argue that Bond does still look a bit silly at the end of this. Well, at the end of the train scene, but it's a good scene, so it's fine. But yeah, him, Tanya and Nash go off to dinner, and Nash not so subtly drugs Tanya with the biggest pill of scene for. I get it. It's for the film. The audience needs to see, but it's like, and obviously Bond does eventually. You work out that Bond saw as well. But yeah, he drugs Tanya so that she's out of the picture when it comes to getting Electra back, and we enter. I think what a lot of people would say is probably one of the most iconic scenes of the film, if not the most iconic scene.
Yeah, I just kind of want to mention though, what's the deal with the wine? Because I think he specifically orders red wine with fish, which Bond points out to him later, saying, I should have known ordering red wine with fish, which, Bond's absolutely correct there. But I wonder if did he order that to try and hide the pill? I don't think he did he? Because he puts the pill in the white wine.
I think it was, yeah, you're right. He puts it in the white wine. I think it was probably a bit of a method to tell the audience that probably adding to Bond realizing that he's not who he says he is, because it's like if he was truly a if he was truly a man of taste and an actual English agent, then he would never have ordered red wine with fish.
Yeah, it seems like that it's Bond's a proper British bloke who knows all these rules. It does make us look quite snooty, but I guess it kind of works.
Yeah.
So after that scene, basically the Tanya is drugged, so she kind of starts passing out, which is an excuse to get her out of the picture, because technically Tanya doesn't know about this guy. She still believes that she's working for Russia. She doesn't know about Spectre. She doesn't recognize this person at all. So of course, Captain Nash is getting ready to steal the machine and take it. So they go back to the cabin. And I'm trying to remember exactly how this kind of plays out. Because he gets the gun out. He just hits him in the back, doesn't he? Just the old karate chop method again.
There it is again. This is what I was saying about how I think this is Bond actually acting a bit stupid. All the other times, you're right, they've made it so that he's not doing anything wrong. It's just Grant's doing it better. But with this, it's like, okay, Bond, yeah, he calls out. He says, "Why did you drug her?" And has the gun. So he knows that there's something going on, right? He clearly knows that there's something bad going on. And yet he's still lets Grant be like, let me just show you this map. Just come down right here beside me. Kneel down right next to me. And then, yeah, he gets out the gun, whack on the back, and then they're in the position of having the fight soon. So it's just that was a bit that just made me think, I don't know.
Yeah, he could have just got the gun out, right?
Yeah.
If he pointed a gun at Bond when he's I don't know, walking into the room, that would have been enough.
Yeah, totally.
But even so, it doesn't kind of spoil what we get next, which is them talking. And I was quite surprised about Bond straight away just says, "Oh, you're part of Smersh, aren't you?" And then he's like, "I don't know." And then he kind of realizes, oh no, it's actually Spectre. Which in this context, if you never read the books or know anything about the books, you're like, what are they on about? And that's something I probably was as a kid, but from reading about this film, I know Smersh is from the books, but the Smersh might be the only time they're mentioned in the film franchise.
Yeah, it's not very often, but it's nice to have that there, just as a sort of, just to see Bond's realization happening kind of in real time, and it's nice to have that little bit of making Grant being in a position to make Bond kind of squirm a bit and enjoying watching. It goes to the eventual sort of Bond villain telling him the whole plan sort of thing. This is the early days of that, I suppose. Very low key.
Oh yeah. He just straight away, with no real prompting, he 100% just fully explains the plan, which, I guess it's a classic storytelling device, right? Where you have this guy and you've spent this whole film setting up the villain to be so much better than the main guy. So how do you make him have a downfall? How do you make that kind of make sense? Well, what you do, you make him arrogant. It's what they did with Dr. No, it's what they do with a lot of Bond villains. You make him super arrogant, underestimate James Bond, and then Bond kind of feels like the underdog and then wins overall because he's still a very kind of capable, talented person. So on paper, it all kind of makes sense. But with how many Bond film kind of does this and how unprompted this all is, he's just incredibly arrogant, and if he was just more to the point and more kind of militant and just got the job done, this would have been a very short scene and he would have totally won. His arrogance kind of made sure he lost eventually.
And I suppose, sort of following on from that, arrogance-wise, I don't know how you felt about the whole, what actually sets up the fight, what gets Bond out of that position where Grant is pointing the gun at him and Bond's on his knees, is the whole idea of Bond sort of bribing him with some gold coins just to get a cigarette. And we know why he's doing that, to eventually be able to use the attaché case and the gadgets within it and the tear gas and whatnot. But to me, it kind of, it didn't add up to what we'd seen of the character, which was this ruthless, efficient, always one step ahead. And then at this last hurdle, it's like, oh, gold coins. Okay, yeah, sure.
I mean, I guess it could kind of work because it implies a real selfishness with this character. That actually, sure, he's part of Spectre, but he's just kind of doing this for himself, and that if he can get anything extra out of this deal, then he's going to do that. Screw Spectre. If I can get some extra money, then I want that money. He does, Bond offer, say, hey, we can double the money for you, which I think he somewhat considers. He just really wants to kill James Bond in this moment. And you get a really kind of moment I actually really like, where it's like, the first one won't kill you, talking about shooting bullets at him. The second one won't kill you. The third one won't kill you. I actually thought his acting in that scene and Bond being in that vulnerable state worked really well in terms of being intimidating. But again, like in terms of those coins, they don't really set him up as being that selfish person. They kind of set him up as being a very loyal agent of Spectre. And as a loyal agent of Spectre, he just wouldn't care about the money in that situation.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from it. But you saying about that line about the bullets, that just made me think, I don't know, something about the way he says kiss my foot. It really stood out to me. It's like, make you come over here and kiss my foot.
That was probably more of an insult back then. Like nowadays, it's a bit silly, but maybe that was more of a thing.
I'm guessing so. I mean,
I hope so.
I'm sure he had some very nice shoes on. But yeah, so he eventually does take Bond up on the offer of the gold coins. And so this is something, again, it's one of those things where I might have missed it, but I'm just assuming Bond switches the briefcases, doesn't he? Or he takes the gold coins out of the one that has the tear gas, because then when he's like, oh, I've got more, that's when Grant's like, no, I'll do this. So I'm just wondering, because like the coins should have been in the one that gassed, but it was in the other one.
Yes. I guess it's whose briefcase is that second one.
I thought it was Bond's as well.
I don't think Bond has two briefcases, though.
It's a very minor point, but it's just something I was like, well, hang on a minute, why didn't that go off? Because it's not the same briefcase he goes for.
I took it, and I might be wrong here, I took it that it was the whole thing that Q showed him, that if you put the latches one way, then it's safe. If you do it how you normally would do the latches, then it goes off. I took it as that, but I didn't really think about it too much. I just took it as like, okay, well, we know how this goes. Bond is going to do it the correct way that Q showed him, and then he's going to send the briefcase his way, and he's going to do it the wrong way, and that's going to trigger the talcum powder gas.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, that is what it is. I was just, maybe I've just saw something that wasn't there. I don't know. But yeah, eventually Grant does open the briefcase, and then tear gas gives Bond a chance to get up, and then we get the fight scene, the very, very intense fight scene. I when I was watching this, I was just putting things like just how it was just it's a very visceral fight scene. There's not much fluff to it. It's not like you have a little bit of a gag about this or something flying over there. It's just two men like fumbling around in a very tight space. And then the lights smash and you get this kind of blue overcast. It's just very heavy. It's very clumsy. It's very sort of like, actually, you can tell it's fighting for your life sort of thing. It's not a showy fight scene. And the fact that there's no music as well just kind of really adds to that.
Yeah, so I kind of put chaotic here, but it's kind of chaotic in all the ways you would kind of want it to be. So rather than this big bombastic fight like the gypsy scene was, this is just two men in a very confined space in the dark because they instantly smash the light. They smash the window, so you get all this wind coming in, so you get the sense of the train going faster or going fast alongside them and stuff. And it's just so visceral, and it's not like a bloody scene. It's not like they get really badly injured. It just works really well, and I think this is a kind of scene that only the Bond franchise pulls off as well as it does, where you got something like a John Wick will be very slick action that all kind of flows into each other, and then you might have another scene like, or you have like The Raid or something like that, where it's very more brutal and kinetic, and it can be a little bit sloppy, but it's still these kind of vicious hits and things like that. But this one, despite being, a lot softer than those films or those other examples or more modern day examples, it still works really well. It's still really nice to see these two people who, I believe these were the actual actors, weren't they? Right? These weren't like stunt people. Actually seeing them trying to pull off this fight, and the fact that they just set this up so well to get to this point, and set up these two characters, set up the scene of them smashing the lights and smashing the window, having this small space. It just works. Like, it's just a really great fight scene, and even though you know how it's probably going to go, it's just really exciting to see it all kind of play out in front of you. It's got to be one of the best James Bond fight scene in the whole franchise.
I would agree. I think it's probably one of the standout parts of this film for me. Just really well done. As you say, it was actually them doing it, and I don't know. I mean, it's not like you can clearly see their faces when they're fumbling around, but it just adds to knowing it's them doing it, and it's all very kind of real in what you're seeing is what you're getting with it. And yeah, the train, the sound, the wind, it's just really, really well done. And it's kind of like when you see that not done well, Spectre, you realize how good a job they did.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think only Bond could really pull off that type of scene. It's so not slick, but in all the right ways. And I really appreciate it about this scene.
Yeah. Yeah. And once again, that briefcase, probably one of Q's best gadgets.
Yeah, he should have made a load more of those, like upgrade the briefcase.
Everything. So useful because they're in the midst of, well, he's got his wire out and strangling Bond, and Bond just about gets hold of the dagger on the quick release from the briefcase and stabs him in the arm and switches around the wire and does it on Grant instead. And it's just great because you have that chaotic fumbling, all the sound effects of the bashing and the wind and stuff, and then it all just sort of quietens down, and you just have the sort of like the exhale of the fight scene, and it's back to business.
It's just the double whammy with the foreshadowing as well. Is it like super clever foreshadowing? Is it Christopher Nolan level style? Like, no, but it's still satisfying in its own way, where, like you say, it's the garrote wire that Nash, I'm calling him Nash now, uses, that you saw at the very start of the film to actually kill the guy who looks like Bond. But then Bond counters it with something else you've also seen with the briefcase, with the knife that Q showed off. So you actually get this like double payoff in a way where it kind of really feels good to see that kind of play out. And this whole scene has that stuff, like with the coins and the briefcase and things like that. So it kind of all comes to a head in this scene throughout it. And I think that's kind of what somewhat helps separate it from just like a normal fight. It's all this stuff that we've already seen. Here it is. It pays off. Yeah, again, not super complicated filmmaking compared to modern films, but it just works. And it works in the end.
It just works, which I think is more than what can be said of the rest of this film. In my head, I kind of see the film just ending here, because I hate to say it, but the rest of the film, for me, goes downhill very quickly. Very quickly.
That's interesting.
I really don't like... I mean, we're talking 20 minutes, maybe not even that, 15 minutes left of the film. And I really just dislike pretty much all of it.
Okay, that's quite interesting, because my kind of general thoughts about this part of the film is that a lot of the scenes, a lot of the action pieces kind of work quite well by themselves, but what we kind of get after this scene is a lot of like half climaxes like 3 or 4 half climaxes in a row where none of them are the actual kind of ending to the film, but kind of feel like they somewhat should be if they put a little bit more effort into it. So we've got that scene on the train, but the train eventually stops. Bond gets Tanya off. Tanya at this point is still pretty awful. They do put a plot reason in. She has been drugged, but the fact that they haven't really done anything with the character and she's just all like, oh, don't leave me, James. Don't leave me. You do kind of have to put up with that for the rest of the film. So now we have Bond on foot somewhat, or in a car, driving to still try to get to London, but Spectre are still hot on their tail, so we have a few more chases to round out the film.
Yeah, so Bond and Talia, they eventually find what would have been Grant's escape and take the guy hostage, the Spectre guy hostage, and take his car and drive on. Well, I suppose actually before that we have the helicopter scene, right?
Yeah, so it goes... Yeah, I think so. It's a little bit tricky. There's like somewhat of a chase scene, but these aren't like proper chase scenes, I feel like. Or at least they're not kind of as well put together as later chase scenes in the franchise. Not that I think the chase scenes here are bad, but the structure of it, it's another time where I feel like this is probably how the book was, and I've heard that this film is very loyal to the book, and books usually have this where films will very deliberately merge everything together so you get that one big payoff, both in terms of how big it goes and also how the story goes, and then you have a little bit of an epilogue and then it ends. But this film doesn't do that instead. But yeah, so I think the first one is he's driving in the car, and then the little yellow helicopter shows up, which we did see before because number 3 did take this helicopter to the Spectre Island. But now we have these other people there. And initially they start throwing grenades, which actually was like, wow, is this a real scene? Because those grenades go really close to the car. And I don't see how they could have faked it. It looks extremely dangerous what they did with those explosions as the car goes by.
Joe, probably. I mean, I'm sure health and safety rules at work were very different then, especially for stuntmen. But I wouldn't surprise me. I really just do not like this helicopter scene. I think it's just a bit... I mean, yeah, like you say, that this scene and the next action scene with the boats, to me, are just out of place completely. They're just tacked on at the end. Maybe because they are following the structure of the book. I don't know, but I think there should have been a creative decision to maybe put them earlier on in the film, spread them out a bit. Just seems like we're getting too much at the end, and as you say, not fully realised. And I just think with this helicopter scene, it's just like Bond's there, helicopter above him, swooping down on him, like dropping these grenades. I guess they'd never heard of guns, these people in the helicopter, and it's just swooping constantly. There's no tension there. It's just swooping for a bit and then a few explosions, and then he just takes out the helicopter with just a really silly method. I just didn't like it.
Well, you're kind of missing one aspect of this where they're chasing him with the grenades in the car, so he stops and says, Tanya, you stay here, I'll take care of this, and then runs to the hills. Yeah. And then you get those scenes that you're saying where the helicopter swoops down, and then they've put like the camera on the front of the helicopter, and you just get this very kind of close-in scene of the helicopter going above with Sean Connery in his hat. I'm assuming not Sean Connery, just like kind of running forward, be like, oh, like falling over. And I did really dislike this scene. I thought it was fine, but the thing I thought of was like, is this a Monty Python sketch? The way it was framed and how silly Sean Connery looked made me think of Monty Python.
I think it's probably a reference to North by Northwest, I imagine. Like that's the vibes I got with the whole field stuff. But I don't know. The fact that that to me is kind of like quite telling. It's just it was just bad. It was just bad to me.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. I think they could have made this work. I think a helicopter chase scene sounds very cool, and some of that grenade stuff I think is good. It's just the fact that he's in like a flour truck and then decides to get out and kind of shoot it. It feels like maybe this should have been better combined with the boat chase scene and kind of make that one solid one instead, rather than kind of having these two separate ones, because we have this helicopter chase scene and then he cuts to the boat, and then it cuts to a scene at Spectre with Blofeld, and then it cuts back to the boat scene, where if you kind of sync that up as one more complete chase, it probably would have been a little bit more satisfying, especially as kind of a, okay, he's killed the main guy, and now we get this nice big chase scene, and then that kind of wraps up the film quite nicely.
Yeah, I think that would have worked a lot better. I think, even the boat chase scene, again, it's sort of something that doesn't really seem fully fleshed out. And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning that the character that we see at the very beginning of the film, in the training camp after the fake Bond's been killed, that's the same actor. I thought it might have even been the same character at first, but then I realised, actually, no, because this is meant to be a Spectre character. It's General Gogov, I think that's his name, who appears quite a lot in the Roger Moore Bond films.
Oh.
I don't know if you caught that. I think it's the same actor. But anyway.
I wouldn't recognise him, to be honest. I don't know the Roger Moore films too well, but I'll keep an eye out when we get there.
Yeah, just another case of like reusing actors, which is quite common for Bond films. But he's the one that's sort of leading the boat chase. And again, just quite silly. Just Bond being chased by lots of other boats. I should have mentioned, like, they move from the car to a boat.
Yeah, there's actually a scene in between. So I mentioned the Spectre scene, but they get onto the boat. Bond finds a captain's hat from somewhere with a little anchor on it, it's cute, but I don't know where he gets it from.
All boats have those.
Oh, yeah, standard issue, right? You can't drive it without one.
You're quite right.
I think Hugh might have put it in his... if you ever find a boat, Bond, you'll need one of these. But then we get cut back to Blofeld and Spectre and them talking. And then this sets up a future scene where basically we have number 3 and number 5 getting all sweaty, as people like to do in this film. Mm-hmm. We didn't even mention sweaty Sean Connery back in the bedroom scene, which I'm very upset about. We might need to do a separate podcast about sweaty Sean.
That's a bonus episode in the future.
Yeah, exactly. The many sweaty scenes of Sean Connery.
We can rank them instead.
Yes, I'm down. So we get quite a short scene. I think it's quite effective. I do quite like it, where someone shows up with a shoe. There's then a little knife that comes out of the shoe. And then it's like, number 3, you've let me down, and I do not tolerate failure. But then he stabs number 5, the chess player, instead, and then tells number 3, you know what to do, get to it, take care of Bond.
The old switcheroo. Although I never really understood that, because was it number 5's fault? She was the one who picked Grant. Why did he not kill her?
I think I always kind of took it as mostly an intimidation act. And to be fair, it was number 5's plan, which is what they argued. So yes, his plan ultimately failed and she was just executing that. But I took it in terms of he still wants James Bond to be killed. Who does he kind of trust to intimidate more to go get that done? And I think he kind of decides that number 3, the Russian woman, is a better candidate for that. So if he killed number 3, then said to number 5, go kill Bond, I think he had more faith that by killing number 5, she would freak the hell out and say, I need to kill this guy because my life literally depends on it. And Blofeld probably has more faith in her to get it done. Or she either gets it done or gets killed anyway by Bond. So it's somewhat of a win-win for him.
That's a very fair point. And she is a lot scarier than the other guy. Yeah.
So maybe that's not it. They might have purely just done it to make Blofeld seem super evil. That was probably the number 1 reason. But even then, I think there is some weird twisted logic there where it somewhat makes sense. I mean, someone's going to die either way. And it maybe gets, in terms of the story, the fact that this woman has been set up as somewhat of the main villain. If she just got killed by Blofeld off screen and that was that, maybe that would kind of not be great.
Tom, your logic makes too much sense. I'm a bit worried. Are you perhaps the head of some organization? Should I be scared?
I'm head of Smirsh, by the way. I took
Smirsh.
that over. Yeah.
They're back.
Are you Smirsh?
Better than ever.
Yeah. So back to the actual chase. So we get that scene, which is to set up something later on, which but arguably doesn't really need to be set up. But oh well, it's nice to see a bit more of the cat, I guess.
You and that cat.
So So then we go on to the boat chase scene, which I quite liked. It's a little bit of a clumsy scene. You got the guy who you talked about on the megaphone who just loves shouting. And like he's just shouting the whole time. Like, give him a warning shot. And then they shoot at them. It's like, you're firing too close. What are you doing? Ah! It's just like shouting throughout this whole scene.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. They don't want to blow up the Lecter. But it's just, again, it goes into fire everywhere. Lots of fire. People literally, I think there's one shot where it's just the boat touches another boat and it just explodes. It's kind of like the car in Dr. No. It's just like, why are things just exploding?
Yeah, so the logic or the explanation in the film of the explosions is that they have a load of petrol or oil on their boat, or Bond does. And then the bad guys shoot at them too close and it hits them all. So Bond knocks them out, which fills the river or canal with oil. He then drives ahead. They drive into the oil. He shoots it with a flare. It sets it alight. What stood out about this scene is that this actually was quite horrific, because in later Bond films, it's treated as like, here's some cool explosions and people jumping into the river being like, oh no, goodness, we're on fire. Haha. But this one's like treated like a war scene, where you've got everyone shouting, there's chaos, they're bumping into each other. The guy's still bloody shouting on the megaphone, but there's like dramatic music, and then eventually that guy gets set on fire and then just falls into the river. It's like surprisingly real. There's no like fun spin on this. It's just people burning to death in a river.
Yeah, I think on that level, I can live with these. Even the helicopter. I think there are some shots in the helicopter scene that are quite impressive, camera-wise. But I just think it just comes at such a weird place in the film. That's the thing that I really get hung up on, is that we're now literally, we're like 5 minutes from the end of the film, and we've got this big chase scene, and it's just doesn't feel like an ending to me.
No, I can understand that. The pacing of this film is still quite quick, but it does kind of somewhat lose its way a little bit here, where they should have really tied all that stuff together to make it feel more like a film and a proper kind of film ending. And I think they could have done that, but due to them sticking, I'm going to say it's the book. I'm going to have to say I haven't read the book, but it just feels like the way that would play out, where you've got all these little kind of things where, okay, Bond is still in Croatia and he still needs to get somewhere, and we still have all these characters in the background that needs to be resolved. So right, let's try and come up with a exciting way to have this all resolve. And it feels quite segmented, and it's just kind of, again, you get about 3 or 4 half climaxes and then the film stops after that point.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But they do make it out. They make it out alive, and I think they end up in Venice. Is it Venice?
Yeah, I think it's Venice. It's quite nice because the film starts in Venice, so it's actually quite nice that they end in Venice. I thought that was quite nice bookmarking there.
Yeah, of course it does, because you get the end shot. Yeah, on the gondola. Yeah, and cuts to Bond and Tatiana in a hotel in Venice, and everything's great. They got away from Spectre. They got the Lecter, and Bond's on the phone, and who comes in? None other than Kleb, dressed up as a maid, ready to clean the room. I think it's just all these things together, the helicopter, the boat, and this scene, really just, to me, makes the film end on a little bit of a lesser note than it could have. Because to me, this scene is just, it's a bit of a waste of that character of Kleb. I think she's not seen hugely in the film, but as far as characters go, she's like very visually memorable. She has a great kind of character. And as you say, that scene with Blofeld just before, where she knows she's got to do this. I think for that then to lead to this, where she's taken out really quite quickly and a little bit lazily, I think just didn't really do the character justice.
There's a couple of things I do like about this scene, but the execution is still very much off on it. I like that she's coming in as a maid with the shoe, and there's like pure desperation there that this woman has gone from being the head of this organization with this big plan being reduced to due to James Bond and also Blofeld due to this like manic desperate plan that makes no sense. And I kind of like that in a way, to see this villain fall from grace and just do this like insane thing that just wouldn't make any sense at all. So I kind of like that, even if it's a little bit clumsy here. And I also like the idea that Tanya is the one who eventually says, oh no, you're bad, I'm going to shoot you. But again, it comes down to execution, where the character development of Tanya is completely fumbled throughout the film. So what should be quite a satisfying moment of saying Tanya has broken free of Spectre and her influence and is going with James, that should work quite well, and all the elements were there. Because those elements haven't been developed throughout the film, it kind of makes that moment a little bit weaker. But I feel like in terms of what they were trying to set up, this should have been quite a big moment for Tanya saying, oh, I know you're evil. And I think it thematically makes sense for her to shoot number 3 and get that final moment. I think that's quite good. It's just unfortunately everything that kind of leads up to this moment kind of gets fumbled a little bit. So it doesn't kind of pay off in the way that they were perhaps hoping.
I totally agree. I think that's right. I think good ideas, but bad. What's the word I'm trying to think of? Where's the word I'm trying to think of?
It's not execution. It's not what
execution. That's the word. Yes, because I actually think Kleb, when she is shot, great death, great sort of like collapsing down the wall. I really like that. As you say, good desperation in the character, and nice movie death. I like that, kind of hammy, but you got to have that. I just think, like you say, the whole thing with Tanya and her, where her mind is at, just isn't really fully realized.
And that brings us to the end of the film. So the focal theme of From Russia with Love kicks in, which is very nice to hear. And then it ends on Bond in a boat with Tanya looking at the footage of them banging earlier from the hotel.
Yeah.
She's like, what's all this then? And he's like, I'll let you take a look. And then he drops it in the river. And then they kiss because apparently they're now an item or something. I don't know. We've already talked about it a bit. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's a James Bond film, so it has to end on Bond making out with in a boat as well. Another parallel to Dr. No. It ends in a boat as well. And then that's it, and the credits roll.
With a very, very creepy, yes, as you say, he throws the reel into the river, but there's this very strange wave to it as well. And it's really, I just don't know, it was kind of very strange movement. And what I didn't really like, another thing I didn't really like about the ending, more bad rear projection, which just kind of, I don't know. It would be really nice if they were actually there in Venice, but alas, not quite.
Yeah. And I was kind of thinking as the From Russia with Love theme plays, because of course it says Russia in the title, but it's obviously a bit more of a love song, I guess. And I was wondering if it was written to match Venice and this type of environment instead. It felt like they played it in this moment because the song was kind of written for this moment of, they're in love and stuff. And the other time we've seen it is when Bond was with a woman and hanging out with that, more relaxed, sunny and things like that. It feels like maybe that theme was specifically written for these scenes in mind, because it seems to match quite well.
I think you're right. I'd not really thought of that, but yeah, it does have the end of the film. Like I say, it's a proper crooner song. It's like something Frank Sinatra would sing or whatever. And it has that. It's definitely not like later Bond films where it is bombastic. Did you also notice that in the credits it says the end and then not quite the end?
Not quite the end.
I like that. Not quite the end. And then you do get the James Bond will return.
Yeah, if you didn't know, if you saw that film in the cinema and you didn't know, that would actually be a really cool moment. Obviously, knowing where this goes as a franchise and us seeing this all kind of before and knowing Bond, it's like, oh, that's cool. That's the first time they say James Bond will return in. But it is a little bit crude. But again, if you didn't know and it's saying, yes, the next film we're going to do is Goldfinger and say not quite the end, you'd be like, oh, interesting. Because surely nothing like that has been done before. It's like the equivalent of Marvel films nowadays with the stinger at the end. Like this is like almost the first example of that.
It really is. Yeah. Take that, Marvel.
Yeah. I think they're doing okay. I think they're doing okay, Marvel.
I don't know. I think they might be a little bit shaky. I think they might be needing some help.
So that was from Russia with Love. I get the sense from you, Joe, that you're actually not on high as the film as you once were. And actually, this might have brought the film down for you a little bit as we went through.
I think potentially yes. Obviously, we are 2 films in. It is still going to be beating Dr. No. But when we get on to more films in the series and ranking them, I don't know now. Because, as I say, I think pretty much everything, give or take a few scenes, everything up until the train and the train fight is great to me. I think it really just falls down in that last 20 minutes, pacing wise and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't stop it from being high up there, because I think what it does do well, it does really well. But yeah, I'm quite surprised. I think it might have lowered a little bit in my mind from before.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I had a somewhat different experience where, I mostly agree with what you're saying, and the stuff with Tanya, I think is the stuff with Tanya for me is the biggest problem of the film, although it's still somewhat smaller, but I still really kind of enjoyed the scenes. And yes, you're right with the pacing at the end of it and these different scenes, but I still kind of enjoyed them individually. And I think I'm a bit higher on the film than I once was. I don't know if I see this going into the top 5, but again, when I originally started out, I had Goldfinger as my number 1 Sean Connery film, and I do feel like that perhaps is still going to be good, but I just had such a great time with this one. So many great moments, so many cool kind of scenes, such like Sean Connery just kind of smashes it. I love the whole Nash thing and that other Asian guy. I think they do those parallels so well, and it's so smart, and the From Russia with Love theme, the music is so good. This just felt like such a great adventure where, yes, some of that stuff is kind of a little bit off, but it does give it a somewhat unique feel, and the budget really does help with this film. So I came out very positive, and I think probably will rank it higher than you when all is said and done.
Oh, interesting. I do think it is something to be said about the fact that this came out 1 year after Dr.
Well,
No.
yeah, 1 year, and they did go to Turkey as well and everything.
Yeah. I mean, we have to now wait 6 years at least for a Bond film, and it's just like they pumped them out, which you would perhaps think would actually be not good, but where it is like it was still a very new franchise and they were finding their feet, it meant that they were kind of improving quickly rather than cutting corners and everything.
Yeah, and I want to say the next 2 came out subsequent years as well. I think it was You Only Live Twice that had the 2-year gap.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So for me, you've already said From Russia with Love number 1, Dr. No number 2. I will also echo that. I will put From Russia with Love at number 1 and Dr. No at number 2. I do see them somewhat separating, but I could see From Russia with Love for me being a top 10. Because, yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It's just such a classic Bond film. Maybe it's not one of my favorites, but I just had a blast rewatching it again.
Oh, yeah. I still definitely enjoyed watching it again. I don't think there's going to be any Bond film. Well, we'll see. But I don't think there's going to be any Bond film that I come out and think, ugh, that was a waste of 2 hours. But this certainly wasn't that.
No, and that's the thing. Yeah, it was actually only 5 minutes longer than Dr. No. They were actually very similar lengths.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, Dr. No is 109 minutes. This was 114 minutes.
Wow, okay. It felt like it did a lot more with that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the locations and stuff like that. Yeah, as you say, did a lot more with that time. It's about the same pacing as Dr. No, but they do jump around quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode. We have ranked them. Not a very exciting ranking, unfortunately, but we are getting there.
It will get more interesting. It will, I promise.
I think by the time we get to the Sean Connery ones, our list should at least look somewhat different, I would say. And then Roger Moore is just the Wild West. God knows what's going to happen then.
I'm excited.
But this has been episode 2 of the Bond Revisited podcast. Join us next time when the Bond Revisited podcast will return with the next film in the franchise and a pretty big one with Goldfinger.
Never heard of it.
Sounds rubbish.